enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning. Welcome to The Point with me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce.
Breaking news this morning, saved from disaster. HSBC has stepped in to save the British arm of the US bank SVP. It's protected potentially tens of thousands of British businesses and jobs.
They think it's all over, but is it? Gary Lineker could be back on air on Saturday as BBC bosses race to end the mutiny at Match of the Day. But should the presenter be allowed to say what he thinks? This morning, MPs and TV stars have their say right here. We could get a decision imminently.
And putting lives at risk today, junior doctors walking out in an historic 3-day strike. They've demanded a whopping 35% pay rise, which the government says, understandably, completely unaffordable. But there's pressure on the Chancellor as the week of walkouts begin just 2 days before the budget.
And tears, cheers, and an emotional support donkey. An historic night at the Oscars in LA. Everywhere All sweeps the board. Brendan Fraser makes his Hollywood return. We've got all the latest from the biggest night in La La Land.
Can we ask you, is your child a mixed berry gender fluid muffin? We didn't think so. It's the latest, completely inappropriate sex education leaflet targeted at 7-year-olds, for heaven's sake. So are Britain's kids being forced-fed a gender ideology?
Let us know your thoughts on all of our talking points this morning. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Lots to come. We're going to get stuck into all of that, but first here's your morning's news with Tamsin.
Bev, thanks very much and good morning from the GB newsroom. It's 9:33.
The Chancellor and the Bank of England have secured the sale of the collapsed Silicon Valley Bank UK to HSBC. The UK branch of Silicon Valley Bank was put into insolvency last night after the California-based parent company had its assets seized by US regulators on Friday. Jeremy Hunt says the government had worked urgently to look after the tech sector, confirming all customer deposits would be protected with no taxpayer support involved. The Prime Minister has pledged £5 billion over 2 years to the armed forces, insisting the UK has the funding it needs in a more volatile world. Rishi Sunak has met his Australian counterpart, Anthony Albanese, in San Diego, ahead of unveiling a major new AUKUS defence pact between the UK, US and Australia. Plans to be announced with the US President Joe Biden include supplying nuclear-powered submarines to Australia. Junior doctors are mounting picket lines outside hospitals today, beginning 3 days of industrial action. The British Medical Association says junior doctors in England have suffered a 26% real terms cut to their pay since 2008. The union says newly qualified medics earn just over £14 an hour, which is less than a barista in a coffee shop. Gary Lineker is reportedly set to return to presenting Match of the Day this weekend amid ongoing talks with the BBC. Football coverage was disrupted over the weekend as pundits and commentators walked out in solidarity with Lineker after he criticised the government's new asylum policy. The Telegraph says the BBC is expected to announce its new social media guidelines following the controversy. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. More from me shortly now, though. It's back to Bev and Andrew.
Very good morning. I hope you had a great weekend. Now, today is the first Commonwealth Day since Her Majesty's passing and the first presided over by His Majesty King Charles III as King and Head of the Commonwealth. We're going to be discussing that in just a moment.
But guess what we're talking about first? Of course, Gary Lineker. They think it's all over, but is it? The BBC is about to roll over, we think, to say to Gary Lineker, come back, all's forgiven. You can come back on Match of the Day, even though we know figures were up 500,000 without the silken-voiced tones of Gary Lineker.
So an agreement between the corporation and its highest-paid star could be as early as today, and it's predicted to include a review of the corporation's social media policy.
Well, GB News presenter and former Cabinet Minister and illustrious Tory MP Jacob Rees-Mogg is in the studio with us. Jacob, tell me, the BBC are about to retreat. Quelle surprise?
Yes, you shouldn't be surprised by that. And I think the issue is about the BBC rather than about Gary Lineker's view. He's entitled to have any view that he wants. We are all in favour of freedom of speech and people being allowed to say things that we don't agree with, or we may even find offensive, and that's absolutely fine. He can say what he likes. The issue is that the BBC is the state broadcaster and that it's funded by a tax on televisions. If it weren't, then we wouldn't need to worry about its impartiality. And actually, if we changed the funding mechanism of the BBC, we could have a much freer media, as they do in the United States, where people are allowed to say what they think. And I think that would be much better, rather than this pretense that the BBC is impartial, which it isn't, and then having rows about particular...
So you're saying get rid of the licence fee, which we all have to pay if we watch TV, even people over 75 now?
I have long thought that the licence fee is a constraint on the BBC, that it stops it earning revenues by subscriptions on the iPlayer or by taking advertising, and it leads to a heavily regulated media based around what the BBC needs and what is needed for a state-funded channel. And so, yes, I'm saying the licence fee has passed its sell-by date. It needs to go.
Would you recommend that people cancel their there fees?
No, because people must obey the law. I'm not in favour of...
But cancel their licence fee and not watch the BBC?
Yeah. There are so many different ways of watching recorded programmes now that you don't invariably need a licence fee. I certainly wouldn't pay a licence fee if you don't need it and you don't need...
But if you've got a television, you have to pay the licence fee.
No,
not anymore.
No.
But how can you prove you're never watching the BBC?
You don't have to. The onus of proof is always on the prosecution.
Okay.
You're innocent until proved guilty. You can't watch live television on a television, if I understand it correctly, and you can't use an iPlayer
That's right.
without a licence.
Yeah.
But I think if you watch YouTube
Right.
and watch programmes that have been pre-recorded and aren't BBC ones, you don't need a licence.
And you can watch GBNews without a licence fee, of course. I have several friends who've cancelled their licence fee in the last few years.
And I think people will do this. Do you watch the BBC on conventional television?
Sometimes, yes.
Right.
And
doesn't infuriate
but
you?
not inevitably as much as I did when I was a child, when you only had 4 channels. Actually, when I was a little child, you only had 3 channels. And it's so... I might watch it much, much less, but I still watch things like Newsnight, so... I can't... I'm definitely going to need a licence.
Were they right to suspend Lineker or not?
I mean, I think Lineker's a distraction from the overall picture of the licence fee, and I think those of us broadly on the right have to be very, very careful about attacking people for freedom of speech. So I'm not fussed about what he says. I'm not fussed about his contract. I'm fussed about the fact that the BBC is not an impartial broadcaster, but is funded by all of us, and that's the fundamental issue.
Do you think he was suspended on Saturday night, as opposed to saying that he didn't want to turn up?
I think they said you can't do your show unless you make some form of apology or commitment not to make such outlandish statements.
But dare I say, why do we care?
Yes, you dare.
It's not as if it were Test match special.
Yeah,
I mean, if John Agnew was suspended, now that would be a scandal. Because if we lost a great man like a brilliant
But he tweeted last week if he had said those things that Lineker said, he would have been suspended on the spot because he's not the household name.
Well, he should be.
Well, he is in the cricket world.
I'm absolutely shocked that John Agnew's not a household name.
But the question, like, do we care, I think is really pertinent, actually, and not just about whether cricket is more interesting than football. But, I mean, do people care in that, at the moment, people are struggling to pay their bills? Regardless of how you feel about illegal immigration, you can take a stand on this. What this story has become is this axis around which all these different issues can oscillate effectively. Those people who want to see safer routes for those who are seeking asylum now see Gary Lineker as the hero of their cause, because he is, as he said, I want to give a voice to the voiceless. But those people who do not want to see more safe routes for immigrants are saying that he is the devil and that he shouldn't be allowed to say this. So everybody's projecting onto this story, aren't they? The things that they feel strongly about.
Well, I don't think somebody as high profile as that should be allowed to use his profile in that way when he's paid £1.3 million. He is the embodiment of the BBC. People think Gary Lineker, they think BBC impartiality.
That I think is absolutely true, and although he had a very fine reputation when he was playing football, most of his reputation now is through the BBC. I think that's absolutely fair, and he's been presenting Match of the Day for 30 years. I think in the whole of that 30 years I've never watched it.
Nor me.
That may not surprise you both. So I think you're right that his reputation is a BBC reputation. But I don't understand why he doesn't stand for Parliament.
I said exactly that last week.
He's got these strong views. He is highly articulate.
He struggled with the pay, I imagine. £84,000 a year as opposed to £1.3 million, which we taxpayers pay him, and that's without all the other stuff he does.
Yes, but as I've discovered, you're allowed to be a TV presenter and a Member of Parliament, so he could carry on.
Yes. Who are you?
Well, I think he'd sleep at night, actually, because I think, or even if the BBC wants to carry on using him, give him some political documentaries. Let him have that voice if that's what he wants to do. Send him over to Calais, do something on this if you want to keep him on side and give him that voice. But I don't know. I don't know whether football... I don't believe that he's a loss to the world of football significantly, of football broadcasting. I don't know. Let us know what you think. GBViews at gbnews.uk.
It's regarding Tim Davie, the Director-General, this is going to look... Whichever way this is played, it looks like he's mishandled it, because he has.
Do you know, the two people I feel most sorry for in this world are the Director-General of the BBC and the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Thankless task.
Both of them have completely impossible jobs running organisations that do not want to be run. And I think both of them do as good a job as anybody possibly can. So I'm always reluctant to have a go at either of them, because... Would you take their job?
No.
Well, Tim Davie's an interesting character, isn't he? I mean, you might know him a bit. I know him a bit, and he was from a corporate background, and he was quite an unusual appointment to the BBC. Although he did stand as a Conservative MP, didn't he? Councillor.
Many years ago.
A Conservative councillor, but he's quite edgy. He doesn't like being pushed around. He doesn't like being told what to do, and also he won't want to feel that he's the person telling Gary Lineker what he can and can't say. Because I do think, even though the BBC is by no means impartial, I think Tim Davie is a believer in free speech.
Yes, I think he is, and I think he's been trying very hard to make the BBC more impartial, which is difficult because the BBC isn't party political. It just has a range of views that are sort of polite dinner party views that aren't held by most of the country outside Islington.
And talking of that, Stop the Boats Bill, the vote is tonight at 10 o'clock. Prime Minister is away in California. Odd timing to be away for such an important piece of legislation. It'll get a huge Tory majority. Labour will vote against it. Are you supporting it?
Oh, of course I am, yes. Actually, coming here, the taxi driver who brought me asked me if I was supporting it.
He'd have probably thrown you out if you said no.
And I said I was supporting it, and he went on to say he couldn't understand why there was all this fuss about Mr Lineker's view, because everyone he knew was supporting the bill and thought it was absolutely essential that we finally did something we'd been promising for a long time, but of course couldn't do whilst we were inside the European Union.
And what if the European judges take us on and say nay? Can we still say we'll deal with that, but we're going to enforce this rule and fight the judges afterwards?
Yes, we can. This is really straightforward. It's exactly what we did over prisoner voting rights.
That's right.
Is that the judges found against us in Strasbourg, but not, of course, our own domestic judges. And Strasbourg judgments do not have direct effect. It's not the European Court of Justice when we're in the EU. Parliament then has to follow what those judges say. If we refuse to do so, there is a discussion between us and the Court and the Council of Europe as to what is possible within the agreements that we have. And with prisoner voting rights, ultimately they really accepted that we could carry on doing what we'd done.
Yeah.
Do you think Suella Braverman is quite happy to have this attention on Gary Lineker as opposed to the detail of the bill and whether it has got any chance of being passed?
Oh, it will be passed. I mean, it will be passed through the House of Commons.
And House of Lords?
The House of Lords, yeah.
Well, the House of Lords will get upset, but ultimately, people versus the peers is not a great look when one of the major parties is threatening reform of the House of Lords. The House of Lords will back down in the end. If not, there's the Parliament Act, and that will bring it in before the next election.
This was a manifesto commitment to deal with it.
Commitment. The Lords, they hate Brexit, and they vote against anything to do with Brexit. It's got a lot of lawyers in the House of Lords who don't like anything that tramples on their fiefdom, but ultimately the Democratic House has to win.
All right, that's Jacob Rees-Mogg. What are you doing on your show tonight?
What am I doing on my show tonight? It was too early to say. Well, to see. Follow the lead of earlier programmes.
All right, that's Jacob Rees-Mogg. Now, moving on, let's discuss the government's new illegal migration bill, which will face scrutiny from MPs. There's going to be a vote tonight. GB News Deputy Political Editor Tom Hirewood joins us from College Green in Westminster. Tom, it's going to be a crushing, big win for the Tories in the division lobbies tonight.
Undoubtedly it will be. The Conservatives, after all, still have a large majority in the House of Commons, although it doesn't always feel like it, especially over the last few years. Sometimes it's felt like it's more of a hung parliament. But no, clearly this first vote on this bill will pass tonight. However, perhaps there will be more interest in not the numbers by which it passes, but the individuals who vote against it. Already we know that Caroline Nokes, the former immigration minister and now chair of the Women and Equalities Committee, Conservative MP, seen to be on the left of the party, she has said that she will be voting against this bill. And I have learnt over the weekend that we can expect an intervention from Theresa May on this piece of legislation as well, making one of her not too common speeches in the House of Commons chamber. That will be something to look out for. Of course, she has a big interest in modern slavery legislation, which is to some extent picked apart by this bill. So potentially what will be most interesting tonight is not whether or not this first vote on this bill passes, it almost certainly will, but more so what the voices of dissent sound like within the Conservative Party.
Thank you so much, Tom. Tom down there at College Green. Now, today is the first Commonwealth Day since Her Majesty's passing and the first presided over by His Majesty King Charles III as King and head of the Commonwealth. We're going to be discussing that in just a moment.
And the children of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, now they've not been invited to the coronation, according to reports.
So the formal invitation sent to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex did not mention 3-year-old Archie or 1-year-old Lilibet, which is a bit awkward. GB News royal reporter Cameron Walker joins us now. Cameron, do we know any more about this? I mean, perhaps it's one of those events where children, like sometimes people have weddings, children just aren't invited.
Well, exactly, Bev, and you have to remember that Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet are both under the age of 5, and we haven't really seen the Wales's children under the age of 5 at big official formal events. And if Prince Louis's performance at the Jubilee pageant last summer is anything to go by, perhaps they thought it a bit inappropriate for such young children to be at such a historic occasion of the coronation. But another event that's obviously happening at Westminster Abbey today is the Commonwealth Day service. As you said, it's the first time that the King, as head of the Commonwealth, is going, and as monarch, is going to be in attendance. It was decided at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in 2018 that he would succeed his mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, as head of the Commonwealth, and he will deliver his message from the great pulpit of Westminster Abbey. Now, this year's theme is forging a sustainable and peaceful common future, and of course, as you're discussing, Bev and Andrew, this is off the back and around the same time that, let's be frank, there's some frosty relationships between the King, Buckingham Palace, and across the other side of the Atlantic with his youngest son, the Duke of Sussex. And of course, it's 3 years since the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's final appearance as working members of the royal family, because it was the Commonwealth Day service in Westminster Abbey in 2020, just behind me, that there was a few frosty looks between senior members of the royal family. But the other big focus today is sustainability and particularly youth-led action, because 60% of Commonwealth citizens are under the age of 30, and there's 56 Commonwealth nations. So I would expect King Charles's speech to go on about climate change and sustainability. Other senior members of the royal family who will be here today: the Queen Consorts, the Prince and Princess of Wales, the new Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, Prince Edward, of course, given that title, and Sophie by the King on his 59th birthday on Friday. The Princess Royal and her husband, Vice Admiral Sir Tim Lawrence, will also be in attendance, and they'll process in with the Commonwealth flag for peace. There'll be musical performances by saxophonist Yolanda Brown, a couple of West End stars as well. 2,000 strong congregation, including athletes from England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland who competed in the Birmingham Commonwealth Games this year, and of course some senior politicians as well we're expecting to be in attendance. But yet again, Bev and Andrew, we are expecting for the third time running some anti-monarchy protests outside the Abbey this afternoon, organised by anti-monarchy group Republic. So we'll have to wait and see if they are again completely outnumbered by pro-monarchy supporters outside the Abbey here this afternoon. But of course, it's only a couple of months until the coronation, isn't it? So I think this is one of the last times we will see the King and Queen Consorts in the Abbey ahead of the coronation. However, according to reports, the ballroom of Buckingham Palace, the largest room in the palace, and it is massive, I can assure you, has been transformed into a mock-up Westminster Abbey so they can rehearse in private ahead of the big day in a couple of months' time.
All right, that's Cameron Walker, our royal reporter. Bev, of course, the King is head of the Commonwealth for one reason only. It was the Queen's wish. She did it at that Commonwealth summit, and if she got what she wanted. She also sorted out that Camilla was going to be Queen Consort. The Commonwealth is hugely important to her, and today the King is making a speech about it at Westminster Abbey, whereas before she always did a recorded message.
Ah, OK. And we'll get some pretty pictures, I imagine, of the event, and everyone looking very smart. So let's get the thoughts of David Mellor, the former Chief Secretary to the Treasury, on the ongoing Gary Lineker saga. Good morning, David. You have a feat in both camps. You are a lifelong football fan and also, of course, your political experience. What's your general take on this sorry tale?
Yes, and I also used to present one of the programmes that the BBC had to scrap on Saturday. So, yes, I'm in it up to my neck. Look, I think the problem with Gary Lineker is that he has the opinions of a very left-wing Labour MP, and he doesn't feel at all inhibited in expressing them. And that's because the BBC have just given him the indulgence to do so. And I think there are an awful lot of people now who feel that the BBC is congenitally hostile to the Conservatives and are not prepared to tolerate this any longer. However, they don't seem to have chosen the ground on which to fight Lineker very cleverly. But I think that the problem for Lineker, first of all, and by the way, I like him, and in years gone by, you see quite a lot of him, and certainly when I was doing BBC stuff. So I'm nothing against Gary Lineker, but he's very intelligent, and he has his opinions. But the problem for Gary Lineker is that he's become, as a lot of people do, arrogant and thinks he's bigger than the game. I mean, what I thought was utterly disgraceful was the analogy with Germany in the 1930s. By a bizarre coincidence, I was talking to a friend of mine who was congratulating me on my birthday yesterday, which you're fully entitled to do yourself. And his grandfather was one of the first victims of the Nazis, even before the war was declared, in a concentration camp. And I thought, I'd ask Barry what he thought of all this. And I thought, how can I really ask a man whose grandfather he never knew because he died in a concentration camp what he thought of some ex-footballer's rubbishy nonsense comments about people who arrive uninvited from a safe country onto our beaches? I just would have felt embarrassed. And Lineker should feel embarrassed because this was a lazy man's comment. Obviously, he's got his 50 billion followers on social media. He can say what he likes. Well, the BBC have got to show him that he can't say what he likes.
But David, you were the first ever cabinet minister for culture, media and sport. This would have been in your in tray if you were in the cabinet now. Would you be saying to Tim Davie today, the Director General, do not let him back on air on Saturday, which is what we widely expect to happen?
No, I wouldn't think that would be my role. But what I think, look, the BBC are playing for high stakes. You know, I was once a brave man. I'm not so brave now. And I once took on Mrs. Thatcher when I was Minister for Broadcasting on 4 separate occasions during the 80s and early 90s. And I took her on the subject of the BBC licence fee, which I thought was crucial for quality broadcasting in this country. I don't feel that anymore because the circumstances have changed. And there's really virtually nothing you can get on the BBC you can't get somewhere else. So what Tim Davie has to worry about is whether the BBC will be allowed to retain its licence fee if it appears to be congenitally biased against the Conservatives.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, Jacob Rees-Mogg was saying to us just earlier, David, I don't know if you heard him, it's got to go, the licence fee.
Well, yes, I also heard him, by the way. The only politician I have heard, apart from myself about 20 years ago, who knows what the European Court of Human Rights is all about. The European Court of Human Rights does not make mandatory decisions. It makes decisions that it's possible for the government to ignore. And personally, I thought it was a valuable service that he did to explain this when a lot of other people assume that if the European Court of Human Rights says things, we have to bow the knee. Well, we don't. So I hope that what we're going to get now is a better informed conversation about all of this. What is absolutely certain is that Lineker cannot talk about government statements about people who wind up on our beaches having come from perfectly safe places, often exported by countries like Albania. You know, we all have our exports. Albania have got their exports, which is criminals, drug involved with the trafficking of drugs. And the idea that a government doing its duty, which, by the way, has huge support from the British public, to try and stop this the export of these people via these landing craft, it really isn't possible, I think, for a BBC presenter who is famous for his association with the BBC to say that's like the way the Nazis treated the Jews. That just won't do, and he's got to be stopped from doing that. And if the BBC can't stop him, I personally think the BBC is unworthy of the licence fee. And not that it matters what I think anymore, but I would certainly, if asked, say the licence fee should go because the BBC do not understand the obligations they have to discipline well-known presenters from making absurd comments.
OK, I think we have to move on. The time is against us. David Miller, happy birthday for yesterday. So the BBC and Gary Lineker talks are apparently moving in the right direction. They think it's all over. Is it? We're going to get stuck into that in just a moment. We've got to take a quick break. First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Very good morning. Welcome to The Point with me, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce.
Well, let's get stuck into breaking news this morning. Saved from disaster, HSBC has stepped in to buy that British arm of the little-known US bank SVB. This is going to protect thousands of British jobs and even more businesses from going bust.
They thought it was all over, but is it? Gary Lineker could be back on air this Saturday as BBC bosses race to end the mutiny at Match of the Day. But should the presenter be allowed to say what he thinks? This morning, MPs and TV stars have their say right here. We could get a resolution from the BBC any minute now.
And it'll be a U-turn, of course. Putting lives at risk today, junior doctors have walked out. It's an historic 3-day strike. They've demanded a whopping 35% pay rise. Guess what? The government says it's unaffordable, but this adds to the pressure on the Chancellor in just 2 days before his budget.
And tears, cheers and an emotional support donkey. An historic night at the Oscars in LA. Everywhere all swept the boards as Brendan Fraser made his Hollywood return. We've got all the latest from the biggest night in La La Land.
Good morning. Should Gary Lineker be reinstated to present Match of the Day this weekend? Because he's going to be.
Let me know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email. As always, lots to pack in. But first of all, here's your news with Tamsin.
Bev, thank you. Good morning from the GB newsroom. It's 3 minutes past 10. Gary Lineker is set to return to presenting Match of the Day this weekend amid ongoing talks with the BBC. Football coverage was disrupted over the last 2 days as pundits and commentators walked out in solidarity with the presenter after he criticised the government's new asylum policy. In a statement, the BBC also announced it's launching an independent review into its social media guidelines, with a particular focus on freelancers outside news and current affairs like Lineker. Former BBC executive and presenter Roger Bolton thinks Gary Lineker should be trying to compromise.
I want to watch Match of the Day with Gary Lineker. He's 62. Carry on, Gary, please. Yes, I do. I actually share a lot of his political views, but his ego's involved in this too. You know, he's got to say what is best for the BBC, what is best for the country, not just what is best for Gary Lineker. It's a very complex argument, but I expect today a fudge. And good for a fudge. They're necessary sometimes.
The Chancellor and the Bank of England have secured the sale of the collapsed Silicon Valley Bank UK to HSBC. The UK branch of Silicon Valley Bank was put into insolvency last night after the California-based parent company had its assets seized by US regulators on Friday. Jeremy Hunt says the government had worked urgently to look after the tech sector, confirming all customer deposits would be protected, with no taxpayer support involved. More than 200 tech companies face cash flow risk, with around £2.5 billion in capital locked in the lender. Jeremy Hunt confirmed all customer deposits will be protected.
All those really important companies that had deposits with Silicon Valley Bank UK can access their deposits, can access normal banking services as of this morning. It's a very important outcome. No taxpayers' money has been used, and I think it's a result of a lot of hard work. But I also think it shows that the UK has great resilience in its financial system, that we're able to step in with one of our biggest UK banks in a situation like this and protect a very important sector.
Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary Jonathan Ashworth told GB News the sale has benefited the whole country.
It's important that we've seen this arrangement this morning. I mean, a lot of our tech sector, our life sciences sector would have been severely impacted. I've actually had constituents get in touch with me who would have been impacted as well. So, look, obviously everybody will want to look at the details very carefully today, but this does seem like it has been an important intervention for what would have been something which would have had serious economic consequences for many jobs and businesses in the UK.
The Prime Minister has pledged £5 billion over 2 years to the armed forces. Rishi Sunak met with his Australian counterpart, Anthony Albanese, in San Diego ahead of unveiling a major new AUKUS defence pact between the UK, US and Australia. Plans to be announced with US President Joe Biden include supplying nuclear-powered submarines to Australia. It was signed by the three nations in 2021 to boost defences and counter China's threat in the Indo-Pacific region. Junior doctors are mounting picket lines outside hospitals today, beginning 3 days of industrial action. The British Medical Association says junior doctors in England have suffered a 26% real terms cut to their pay since 2008. The union says newly qualified medics earn just over £14 an hour, which they say is less than a barista in a coffee shop. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, has called it incredibly disappointing the union has declined to discuss pay on the condition strikes are paused. Voting gets underway for Nicola Sturgeon's replacement as Scotland's First Minister later today. Tens of thousands of SNP members have 2 weeks to vote for their next party leader. 3 candidates are in the running, with Kate Forbes, Humza Yousaf and Ash Regan all standing. Miss Sturgeon quit last month after more than 8 years in the role. Police will prioritise freedom of speech in non-crime hate incidents. It means police will only record so-called non-crime hate incidents when it's absolutely necessary and not simply because someone is offended. The Home Secretary says the draft guidelines will go before Parliament later. Everything Everywhere All at Once swept the board at the 95th Oscars Awards ceremony last night. It won Best Film, Best Director and Best Original Screenplay, and its leading lady, Michelle Yeoh, took home the award for Best Actress. Brendan Fraser won Best Actor for The Whale. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Bev and Andrew.
Well, breaking news, as we thought, Bev, Gary Lineker is back this weekend. The BBC have caved in completely. He'll be back on air after just one weekend off air. The Director General, Tim Davies, says he's a valued part of the BBC. We know how much the BBC means to Gary. I look forward to him presenting our coverage this coming weekend. Their fig leaf, to cover their embarrassment, they're launching an independent review into social media with a particular emphasis on freelancers like Gary Lineker.
I can tell you how much the BBC means to Gary Lineker. It means 1.35 million quid a year. That's what the BBC means to Gary Lineker. I have to say, though, I think it's a triumph for free speech. I know that's a controversial thing to say in this building, but I don't want to live in a world where presenters are... we here at GB News, we have quite a liberal social media policy, to some degree, but we still have to observe.
But we're not funded by the taxpayer to the tune of nearly £4 billion a year. If you've got a TV, pretty much you have to pay for the licence fee. You used to, if you're over 75, you could get it free. A lot of 75-year-olds would be very offended by what Gary Lineker said.
But if it'd been in, this is the thing. What I don't, we've got a guest. We talk about this. Right. I think we've got a guest here. Charlie Beckett is joining us now, Professor of Media and Comms at the London School of Economics. Good morning, Charlie.
Good morning to you.
Good morning. So we have all this fuss, we have all of this noise, it's all the front page of the papers for days, and then the BBC say he can come back on after missing one Saturday and they're going to look at their social media policy. Is this the right outcome for this?
I think it is, actually. I mean, I was predicting this throughout the controversy, actually, but I thought it was extraordinary that the BBC had stumbled into this controversy. And I think the good news for everybody, really, is, as you mentioned, that Lineker is able to say what he feels. And the BBC has learned a valuable lesson, which is don't overreact when, right-wing newspapers and right-wing Tory MPs get cross about something that a freelancer has said. And Andrew's quite right about the fig leaf of this impartiality review or inquiry, but it's also quite necessary because the rules just didn't make sense, or at least the way that Tim Davie had interpreted the rules just didn't make sense, that, somehow Gary Lineker was going to be censored. I mean, he's a sports presenter talking about a general news issue on his social media, and yet other people have said other controversial things and didn't get silenced. It's very important that, people, the BBC journalists, especially their political journalists, are seen to be impartial, because that's what's different between them and GB News. GB News, wonderfully, famously, is very partisan. And, as Andrew said, we don't pay a licence fee for GB News, so that's all fair enough. But the BBC stands out from all the other stuff because it tries, at least, to represent all the views of all the people that pay that licence fee.
You mentioned the licence fee, Charlie. We had Jacob Rees-Mogg on just a moment ago saying, in his view, the licence fee has to go. This whole episode confirms why, because if the BBC is nothing, if it isn't about impartiality, do you see the days are numbered for the licence fee, and should they be?
No, I think this lesson means the opposite. And I think Andrew quoting Rees-Mogg on the BBC is hilarious. He's probably the least impartial person I can think of when it comes to talking about journalism in general, let alone the BBC. And I think it actually proves the opposite, that however incompetent this episode has been, I think it shows that their intentions are good. That they are trying to be relatively objective in a very wicked world where there are lots of partisan people, lots of conspiracy theorists, as Bev mentioned, lots of misinformation out there, and the BBC is at least trying. And if you go anywhere else in the world, you will be hearing people saying how much they wish that they had a kind of boring but balanced broadcaster like the BBC.
I'm sort of fascinated when we're talking about this issue and how the political left and the political right meld together in this particular conversation, because you've got the chair of the BBC, Richard Sharp, who is a Conservative. You've got the Director General of the BBC, who literally stood as a Conservative councillor. We've got Gary Lineker accused of being left-wing in not supporting Suella Braverman, but we've got the most left-wing Conservative government in living memory with the highest tax bill of 70 years. I can't see a true Conservative amongst a lot of them, Charlie. So is the left-right distinction even relevant? Does it help this conversation?
I think you're spot on. And I think that's one of the problems with this idea of impartiality. The old-fashioned idea of impartiality was, look, if I got Andrew on a programme, I had to get somebody from the left on the programme, and then it was all sorted. But I don't think it works like that anymore. Issues, even an issue like, asylum and refugees, doesn't fall neatly into a left-right or even a Conservative Labour or a party political spectrum, does it? It's much more confusing, and therefore when we talk about impartiality, it's much harder. Impartiality never meant that you had to be balanced or neutral all the time. It just meant that you had to try, at least, to reflect different views. So I'm not bothered that there's a Tory who's the chairperson of the BBC, that we've had Labour people being chair of the BBC, but it's how they act. And I think what's compromised it is the particular scandal around Sharp and him not being entirely transparent about his mate Boris and how he helped him get a loan. That didn't help. But the fact that they're political doesn't matter. I worked at the BBC for 10 years and I was a member of a party. And I'm sure Andrew can guess which party.
Yes, I think I can.
I think you can, Andrew, yeah. But it didn't affect it. In fact, it pushed me the other way. I strove all the time to counter my own biases, partly because it's much more interesting, but it also makes for much more interesting journalism, much more reliable journalism. And I think people at the BBC at least try to do that.
Can I ask as well about Gary Lineker? I mean, in a sense, we shouldn't make it about the individual, but he is such a big figure. In a sense now, this will make him almost untouchable.
Well, I don't think so. I think that I think Gary actually, I don't know him personally, but my sense he is a thoughtful person. And I think he realises that, as Spider-Man would say, with great power comes great responsibility. I mean, Bev mentioned how much he earns there, but he could actually earn a lot more money if he went to commercial channels. Well, so I think he values the BBC and the authority that it gives him, actually. And I think he realises he's got to balance that with a little bit more thoughtfulness about what he says. And how
he hasn't done that before, has he? Charlie, there's been quite a lot. There's been quite a lot of these texts and tweets in the last 5 or 6 years, and each time he seems to have been emboldened. I think this might make him emboldened even more.
Well, let's see. I doubt it, to be honest. I think this one particularly. I don't want to get too much into the sort of Godwin's law problem around, Germany in the 1930s and comparisons with governments now. I don't think it is particularly a good tactic. But what he actually tweeted wasn't entirely wrong. I just think he has to ask himself, was that the best way to express his sympathy with asylum seekers? And it probably wasn't.
No. OK, Charlie, thank you. Professor Charlie Beckett there from the London School of Economics. It's interesting, with Gary Lineker being on that £1.35 million BBC salary, he also probably makes that and more from his commercial deals.
Yeah.
He's very unusual in being a BBC character who is still allowed
to do endorsements. And Alistair Campbell, who, of course, was all over the media this weekend, Tony Blair's former spin doctor, about what an outrage it was. He does a podcast, and whose company produces that podcast? Gary Lineker. He's got a finger in so many pies. And he's also a commentator, I think, on BT Sport. So why the BBC pay him so much money is beyond me.
That is the most pertinent question.
We've agreed, both Bev and I know nothing about football. We'll do it for a tenth of the fee.
That'd be terrible. OK, we can also be joined now by former Leeds United Managing Director David Hay, who can give us his thoughts on this from a football side. Good morning, David. Thank you so much for joining us. So, what's your assessment of the situation? Gary Lineker tweets something which some people thought was inappropriate, others thought he was speaking what they wanted to hear. He has a week off football, he's back on this weekend, and the BBC, they're going to look at social media policy. What else do we take from it?
Good morning, Bev and Andrew. I mean, firstly, what a mess. I mean, when I looked at this developing story from a human rights perspective, first of all, I do agree with some of what Gary Lineker said. But the question that I had was, why was it being blown into an issue of human rights, freedom of speech, left versus the right, when it really, to me, certainly isn't that. When I was at Leeds, we had a very clear social media policy, and that's nearly 10 years ago now, and that policy covered issues of people saying, including players saying things on social media that were not appropriate. I remember there was one young player who was sitting on the bench for a while, wasn't very happy, went onto his Twitter and said, "I'm not being played, but at least I'm being paid." And his future, eventually he left the club. So why was that something that was not properly in place, if indeed it wasn't at the time, to prevent this from being blown up? And I think it's very concerning that if that wasn't in place, you saw an avalanche of presenters obviously backing Gary, effectively holding the BBC to hostage. So, I think, from a football perspective and it should have simply been a matter of an employee / or a contractor performing their obligations in accordance with the contract, and it's now been blown into this.
But David, you're absolutely right. The BBC say they're going to launch an independent review into their social media guidelines. Why did it take this to do that when Gary Lineker has been breaching what Tim Davie clearly thinks is the guidelines for years? I went back, we were finding controversies involving Lineker in 2016. This is, as I said at the beginning of the programme, it's just a fig leaf to cover the fact the BBC have marched up the top of the hill, and like the grand old Duke of York, they've marched straight back down again.
Absolutely. Why was this not dealt with before? I'm sure there are policies. We've all worked with the BBC. I've worked with the BBC on various programmes like Panorama. We know about the impartiality. Why was this in the first place allowed to happen? Why were other presenters allowed to join him and effectively hold the sports programme into hostage? Something that shouldn't, I don't think, happen again. And it's very, very worrying. And it really isn't one about human rights, I don't believe, or free speech. It's, the focus really should be on the football and not the pundits.
Well, when you say it's not about freedom of speech, how do you draw that conclusion, David? Because what's happened here, he was silenced for saying something that was controversial, and now he's back. This is surely about freedom of speech. It almost doesn't matter, does it, what he said? Like Jacob Rees-Mogg said at the start of the show, we live in a world where we are free to express our opinions, even if people don't like it.
Well, I don't know. Obviously, I'm not there with the internal workings of the BBC, but I'm not sure that he's back there because they're defending the values of freedom of speech. He's back there because, of course, he calls it effectively a walkout and a destruction of the sports programming, and they didn't know how to go forward. So for me, it's not, and it's not an issue of free speech. No one's saying to him he can't say what he wants elsewhere. I think the problem that you've got with him, as you have with other contractors, is that on his Twitter account, it doesn't say he's an employee of the BBC or not, or a contractor. That little phrase that we all see for, opinions my own. And I think that's something that BBC really did fail on, because why is it, as I think some of your presenters said earlier on, he's very much linked with the BBC,
of course he is.
rightly or wrongly in our minds. And when you see him say something, you almost believe yourself that it's a BBC statement, even though it isn't. So that's probably our mistake in thinking that.
And that's, of course, David, why his remarks get such a wide traction, because he is the embodiment of the BBC. He's been there so long. He's part of the fabric and the furniture.
Well, absolutely. And I think the other thing, I think it was Nana at the weekend made the comment about the consistency in which the BBC needs to put in place their approach to social media activities by their presenters. If they're going to have this approach with one, they need to have the same consistent approach with all the others. Otherwise, that then becomes unfair. We've all seen presenters that have lost their positions in various networks for things they said in the social media or on air. And obviously now you've got this issue with Gary Lineker, so I'm sure there'll be some presenters sitting at home somewhat feeling very hard done by.
I'm amused by the fact on Match of the Day, the Match of the Day audience this weekend, David, was up 500,000. Was that just people curious to see how good or bad it was without Lineker, or was that people tuning in thinking, good, we're not going to have all those experts droning on and on? Didn't Michael Gove say once, the Secretary of State, I'm fed up with experts? Are people fed up with experts?
Well, I think I was one of the ones that watched it, and I hadn't watched it for a very long time.
There we are.
I probably watched it to see how it would go. I mean, I think, certainly from a football commentary perspective, sometimes there is that little bit too much. So, but it would have been nice to see some younger presenters given that opportunity to present that with the support of Gary, perhaps, to move those on. Obviously, that didn't happen. But I think, more on the football, less on the overpaid pundits, I think.
All right, we agree on that. Thank you, David, former Leeds United Managing Director David Hay. We've got our national reporter Ellie Costello outside Broadcasting House this morning. Hi, Ellie. So we've had this statement from the BBC just moments ago. For people who are tuning in, what did they say?
Yes, Gary Lineker is set to return to our screens this weekend. It's after a deal has been made with the BBC after what has been a pretty bruising weekend for them, it must be said. So this is a statement from Director General Tim Davie, who said Gary is a valued member of the BBC and I know how much the BBC means to Gary. I look forward to him presenting our coverage this coming weekend. He also announced that the BBC will be launching an independent review into its social media guidelines with a particular focus on freelancers, which is, of course, what Gary Lineker is, outside of news and current affairs. He continued to say Gary has agreed to abide by this guidance whilst the independent review takes place. Now, Gary Lineker hasn't confirmed this himself. He has actually just been tweeting in the past few minutes. He's been tweeting a thread on his personal Twitter page. So I'm just going to share that with you now. This is from Gary Lineker in the last few minutes. He says, after a surreal few days, I'm delighted that we have navigated our way through this. He goes on to thank the support of BBC Sport. Football is a team game. Their backing was overwhelming. He says he's presented sport on the BBC for the past 3 decades and he's immeasurably proud to work for the BBC and he can't wait to get back in the chair on Match of the Day on Saturday. But he does continue to stand by his comments that he made last Tuesday. He says, a final thought, however difficult the past few days have been, it simply doesn't compare to having to flee your home from persecution or war to seek refuge in a land far away. It's heartwarming to have seen the empathy towards their plight from so many of you. We remain a country of predominantly tolerant, welcoming and generous people. Thank you. So it does appear as though Gary Lineker is sticking by his comments that he made last Tuesday. Those comments that have snowballed into this row over freedom of speech, impartiality at the BBC as well. But a deal has been made between the BBC and Gary Lineker, and he will be returning to our screens this weekend.
That's Ellie Costello outside the BBC. Bev, he can't help himself, can he? He goes and twists the knife by saying... People like me who support that Stop the Boats policy, which will stop people dying in the Channel, stop people fleeing to this country from safe country called France, people coming from Albania. He's again saying that we're wicked racist. That's what he's saying.
I don't think he is.
Yes,
well,
he is.
I don't think he... Do you know what? In all honesty, I don't think he knows what he thinks about it. And the bottom line is, his life is not affected by it in any way, shape or form. He lives in a beautiful big house. He can take in his refugees and put them in the back room where the chef will cook them a dinner.
Exactly.
It doesn't really affect his life. I think it's fascinating, though, that he's doubled down on it. He doesn't really know what he's talking about, does he?
That's what I said to the professor earlier. He is now untouchable. He's just proved it because he'll say to BBC, OK, suspend me again. I've just repeated everything I've said.
You know what I like a world in which people have strong opinions. That makes the world a little less vanilla. So I say gloves off. If you work for the BBC, tweet what you like and we'll talk about it for hours on end.
And talking of strong opinions, we're going to be talking to somebody who's got very strong opinions about Commonwealth Day celebrations today. There'll be protests this afternoon and we'll have one of the organisers in the studio next. So we'll see you in 2 minutes.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it. Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Well, if breaking news, the BBC, of course, have caved in, and Gary Lineker will be back on Match of the Day this weekend. He's put out an email saying how pleased he is to be back at the BBC, and he's doubled down by repeating all the stuff that caused all the offence about the small boat spill in the first place. 4-0 to Gary Lineker. Before we talk about that a little more, though, King Charles, he's going to deliver his first Commonwealth Day service as monarch. There'll be protests against the amount of Commonwealth countries that don't support same-sex relationships.
That's right. Organisers are asking protesters to gather at 1:30 p.m. opposite Westminster Abbey as 32 out of the 56 Commonwealth member states still criminalise same-sex relations.
Well, we're delighted to have within studio the director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation, Peter Tatchell, and Conservative Friends of the Commonwealth, Sunil Sharma. Peter, to you initially, you and I have talked about this many times, 35 countries not allowing, criminalising homosexuality. In Barbados, you go to prison for life if you're gay.
Yeah, it's 32 out of 56 Commonwealth member states criminalise same-sex relations. 7 have life imprisonment. 7. Right across the Commonwealth, there is mob violence, the murder of LGBT plus people, and it happens with virtual impunity. The Commonwealth Secretary-General, Baroness Scotland, has failed to speak out. She's failed to defend the LGBT plus community, and I think she's unfit to hold that post and should resign.
And in the Maldives, you can be subjected either to imprisonment, banishment for a year, or 30 lashes of the whip for being gay. I'm a gay guy, you're a gay guy. Pretty scary, isn't it?
And it isn't just LGBT plus rights. Right across the board, the Commonwealth is among the worst countries in the world, not the worst, but among the worst countries in the world in terms of human rights violations, including the suppression of the right to strike, peaceful protest, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of association. All these things are violated in a majority of Commonwealth countries.
Sunil, let me bring you in. Is it our job to tell these Commonwealth countries what they should and shouldn't do with their legislation around homosexuality?
I don't think it is. I completely agree with everything Peter said in terms of his comments and that these countries should be doing better. But I don't think it's Britain's place to sit there and decide for other countries on their domestic issues.
But what about where he's king?
I still don't think they're sovereign countries. All these 56 countries have chosen to be part of the
embarrassing for
Commonwealth.
the king to be speaking today to an organisation where he's head of state, and some of those countries you can be banged up in prison for being gay.
Look, I think it's wrong that that shouldn't be part of the legislation, but I think we have to get away. Often on the criticism of the Commonwealth, we talk about colonialism, it's glorifying colonialism. I think it's a very colonial way of thinking to enforce our British values onto these countries. I want these countries to come to the right decision, which I believe in not having these these ridiculous bills that we're seeing, some of these violations in human rights, but they've got to do it on their own accord. If we go down this territory of we don't want to be around countries that are different to us, then we'll have very few allies.
Peter, don't we have, as Sana was saying, we don't necessarily have a right to tell them what to do, and don't we have more chance of changing these very outdated, old-fashioned, barbaric rules in these countries if they remain within the Commonwealth?
Well, of course, you're absolutely right. We have no right to tell them what to do. What we have got the right to say is all these member states have signed up to the Commonwealth Charter, which guarantees equal treatment and non-discrimination to every citizen. So they're violating what they've signed. All we're saying is honour your obligations. And in countries like Uganda, for example, the anti-gay laws there are against Article 21 of the Uganda's own constitution, which again prohibits discrimination.
Peter, you and I are old enough to remember Robin Cook in that first Tony Blair government. Do you remember they had something called an ethical foreign policy? Remember, it didn't last very long. What about selling arms to countries which... He said he would tackle Commonwealth countries which refused to legalise same-sex relationships. Here we are, nearly 30 years later.
Absolutely. And even more shocking, in the 6 decades the Commonwealth has existed, the biennial Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting has refused every single time to even discuss LGBT plus rights. They've said it's so disgusting and vile, we're not going to even allow it on the agenda. So this is an extremely homophobic organisation. There are some good members in it, like there are some Commonwealth countries like Botswana, which have recently decriminalised homosexuality. Singapore and Sri Lanka are about to. So there is progress. But there's hardline countries like Ghana and Uganda, which are now proposing to increase their anti-gay laws by outlawing advocating gay equality. That will become a crime punishable by 10 years imprisonment. Membership of an LGBT plus organisation, 10 years in jail, and so on and so on and so on. It is getting worse in some countries, and we shouldn't be dictating them what to do. We should be appealing to those countries to honour the Commonwealth Charter which they've signed.
Sunil, obviously, as we said, this is the first Commonwealth Day for King Charles. Maybe, I'm being optimistic here, maybe he is just tactically easing himself into this role and will then, as we know, he doesn't mind shying away from some political issues. Maybe at some point he will start to put more pressure on these countries. Do you think he will?
I think that the reality is for a lot of these Commonwealth countries, they're going to have to modernise. If they want to be more included in a much more inclusive world, they're going to have to modernise. And it's in their interests, if they want to have longer ties with us, better relationships, better trade, all these sort of things, it's in their interest to abide by some very basic principles that we in this country believe in. I just don't think it's up to us to make these decisions. We have to allow these countries to come to that decision in their own right. And I think we go down a very dangerous territory when we start protesting or fighting against these countries in a very complicated world, which we already have in terms of Russia and China. We'll have very few allies left if we go down this route of not being around people.
Really, so we've got to leave it there. That's Sunil Sharma and Peter Tatchell, the legend that is Peter Tatchell. Still to come, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has warned of a serious risk to top British firms. That was following the shock failure of a major US bank. The government has stepped in, HSBC has bought it. That's going to save thousands and thousands of jobs.
Let's find out all about that after your morning's news with Tamsin.
Bev, thank you. Here are the headlines at 10:36. TV presenter Gary Lineker says he's delighted after securing an agreement with the BBC, which will see his return to Match of the Day this weekend. It's after he was taken off-air over a tweet on the government's illegal migration bill. The BBC Director-General, Tim Davie, has apologised and says Lineker will abide by the editorial guidelines until a review of the corporation's social media policy is complete. The Chancellor and the Bank of England have secured the sale of the collapsed Silicon Valley Bank UK to HSBC. The UK branch was put into insolvency last night after the California-based parent company had its assets seized by US regulators on Friday. Jeremy Hunt says the government worked urgently to look after the tech sector, confirming all customers' deposits would be protected and no taxpayer support involved. The Prime Minister has pledged £5 billion over 2 years to the armed forces. Rishi Sunak met with his Australian counterpart in San Diego ahead of unveiling a major new AUKUS defence pact between the UK, US and Australia. Plans to be announced with US President Joe Biden includes supplying nuclear-powered submarines to Australia. It was signed by the three nations in 2021 to boost defences and counter China's threat in the Indo-Pacific region. Junior doctors are mounting picket lines outside hospitals today, beginning 3 days of industrial action. The British Medical Association says junior doctors in England have suffered a 26% real terms cut to their pay since 2008. The union says newly qualified medics earn just over £14 an hour, which is less than a barista in a coffee shop. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, has called it incredibly disappointing the union has declined to discuss pay on the condition strikes are paused. TV, online and DAB plus radio. This is GB News. Now, back to Bev and Andrew.
We will get to your views on Gary Lineker. You've been getting in touch, so it's been such a busy show. In a few moments, we're also going to be speaking to the author of Planet Ponzi, Mitch Firesteiner. The breaking news this morning about HSBC buying Silicon Valley Bank UK. See you in 2. We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB plus radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Very good morning. It's 10:41. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce.
Well, Silicon Valley Bank UK has been sold to HSBC in a private sale. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, was all over the airwaves this morning. If that bank had gone under, it could have had very, very serious repercussions. More than 200 tech companies face cash flow issues with around £2.5 billion tied up in that bank.
So, to go through this major story, if we weren't talking about Gary Lineker today, this is what we would be discussing. It's the author of Planet Ponzi, Mitch Firestein. Morning, Mitch. Thank you so much for coming in. Nobody understands this topic in more detail than you do and can let our British viewers know why this may be relevant to us. I think it was at least 6 months ago, you and I were sat here in the studio and you said this was going to happen.
Well, absolutely, and thanks for having me here today. And I hope I can shed a little light on this. I think this is another epic regulatory and leadership failure. Because we were promised by Janet Yellen, who is the head of the Federal Reserve, and her reckless policies got us to the point where we have 20% inflation globally now with unlimited bailouts and money printing. And that's what I wrote my book about, that this would eventually happen and a crisis would eventually happen because we didn't really fix the systemic banking issues and problems from the great financial crisis. Silicon Valley Bank, we were a depositor in a joint investment company that we had in Silicon Valley. And in 2018, I realized that that was not a very good institution. And
was it taxpayer investment or was it private money from?
No, it's private money.
Private money.
Private money.
Sure.
But all the Silicon, this is what I'm going to get at.
Yeah.
Is that the Silicon Valley Bank is the woke bank. So you either go woke and get broke, which is what's happened, or you play that little game. So everybody with the law firms and the oligarchs of Silicon Valley, who, oh, by the way, engineer censorship if they don't like you, if you're not in their inner circle. Like I was shadow banned on Twitter, kicked off LinkedIn, because I have, I tell the truth, and that's not really allowed in today's set. But I think that we're seeing a 180-degree turn. But to go back to Silicon Valley Bank in the story, the issue that I had is that the people that were running the bank didn't understand regulatory issues. They didn't understand risk and risk management, which is one of the things that I've done for my 40-plus years in international finance and banking. And I was concerned about that it would look like a train wreck, because the first thing that you should do is be able to manage your risk. Now, what you're hearing in the public sector, they're saying, oh, no public funds were used. But if you notice, those could be weasel words, because the government didn't say, oh, well, we're not guaranteeing and backstopping the bad loans. You're not hearing that, are you? So I would question and want to see every last I dotted and T crossed, because the devil is in the detail, as it always is. And we're still majority shareholders of NatWest.
Right.
Now, what I argue in my book, Planet Ponzi, is if you're too big to fail, jail, or bail, you're too big to exist. Now, moral hazard and all of this was caused by Janet Yellen, who was the head of the Federal Reserve, that got promoted upwards to run the Treasury. And they came in with a bailout on Sunday, and they claim it's not going to be taxpayer funds. But I would strongly doubt that.
If there wasn't a bailout, though, how would that have impacted companies operating in Britain in the tech sector, which is one of the great apparent British success stories?
Yeah, but that's right, apparent success story. But is it a success story because we have jobs and these are zombie companies that make zero profits and never will make a profit? And Silicon Valley Bank, because of the executives, lent billions of dollars to these companies that are not profitable. So why are we going to be on the hook if they don't make it? Great. We're going to be paying, like the PPE scandal for billions of dollars, the train to nowhere HS2 that now is delayed till 2050 and it's not going to happen. But they have, what we have now in the world, and it's a crazy place. You've got to be woke or you get canceled. And they're spending inordinate amounts of tax dollars on things that we don't get any benefit from. So it's really not good. And, this topic needs to be explored more than just 10 or 12 minutes.
OK, let's just watch this, Mitch. This was Labour leader Keir Starmer talking a little earlier about the importance of tech companies in a growing economy.
What people here would say, what people across the country would say, is we've been pretty stagnant now for 13 years, but companies like this have real ambition, communities have real ambition. And that's why we've said an incoming Labour government will have the highest sustained growth in the G7. That's real ambition. And so our message today to the government for the budget is match the ambition of the British people, match the ambition of an incoming Labour government.
Why is it relevant to British people now, Mitch? Should we be worried about funds in banks? What happens next?
Correct. Well, the problem is it's not up to the government to pick winners and losers. Capitalism without bankruptcy is like Catholicism without hell. So basically, if you're on your own, now the taxpayers are going to end up picking up a tab. We have the worst cost of living crisis going on, and this is a big diversion, like Lineker is a diversion away from what's going on to each person's can't afford its heat or eat. But they don't want to talk about that, so they're going to come up with every type of diversion, divert, deflect, and deceive, the 3D policies. And the politicians need to be held to account. We need leadership. We need guidance. We need to get our economy back on track, not by supporting zombie tech companies that don't and never will make a profit. That's not the government's role or job.
So what would you, if you were writing the budget then for Wednesday, what would you want to see in there, Mitch, to help British people?
Well, what I would like to see is I would like to see the fiscal profligacy end, and I would like to see things that will actually increase the entire country's like leveling up. I'd like to see some of the promises kept that were not kept in the 2019 agenda. I'm not political. Look, I don't care. I mean, I buy and sell things. And what I look to do is make things fairer for everyone. And I think that that's what everybody needs to do.
All right, that's Mitch Fierce. How do you pronounce that name?
Firestein.
Firestein, a great name. Author of Planet Ponzi. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, let's read some texts and emails here. Lineker, of course. Martin says he doesn't have to wait 3 weeks for a doctor's appointment, doesn't have to wait 2 years to have an operation. Immigration doesn't affect the likes of Lineker. Happy to abuse his position to tell us we should let more people in.
Yeah, that's right. And Jeff has said, can someone please explain why the BBC are so desperate to get Lineker back when the viewing figures went up by 500,000 on Saturday night's match of the day without him?
And Michael says, let's just face it, Lineker is laughing at us all because he's managed to hang on to his taxpayers' million. Completely humiliating U-turn by the Director General of the BBC, in my view. Mark says, great news for our national security and defence spending. Shame that it's 20 years too late. We're talking here about defence spending. The government says our security is their top priority, but if that was the case, why don't they stop the boats invading our shores?
Now, Lineker is trending on Twitter, as you would expect, and his son George tweeted yesterday to say, I'm proud of the old man after a busy few days, shouldn't need to apologise for being a good person and standing by his word. The reaction from the public has been overwhelming. Thanks for the support.
Well, let's go straight to our paper reviews that we've got in the studio. Nigel Nelson, doyen of the Sunday Mirror. Amanda Patel, doyen of the Daily Mail.
Hi, Bev.
And my best mate.
My chair's a bit high.
Oh, well...
I feel like I'm much taller than everyone else.
Be careful, because if you do that, you're going to shoot to the floor. I've learned that lesson the hard way.
We were talking last night at the phone, Lineker. We didn't know if he'd be reinstated today as quick as that. What do you think?
I'm just amazed. The thing that, first of all, every single newspaper for a week now has had Lineker on the front page.
Yeah.
And then today we hear that even the New York Times, which is, of course, we know, a completely lefty organisation, they had it on their front page as their second splash.
Amazing.
Saying, you know, that he is basically, that he's humiliated the BBC. And frankly, I agree with that.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Interesting, though, the left-right play in this, Nigel, because I don't see it through that prism so much.
I mean, the whole thing is that what has happened today would seem like, when we get the details, is that finally common sense has actually come into play. If only the BBC had treated it this way on Friday rather than wreck the entire sports coverage of the channel.
It was not wrecked, it was not wrecked.
Figures were up 500,000 on Saturday, Nigel. It was better without it,
apparently.
was
better without it.
I watched it
last night.
It.
I watched it on Saturday night. I watched Harry score 2 goals.
Do you normally watch it, or did you
always?
Do you?
Yeah.
Tottenham fanatic.
I'm a huge football fan. I watched Harry score his penalty and the goal, and Son scored the goal, which kept us in the top 4. And I loved it. I felt like I was actually at the ground because I didn't have all these idiots in my ear. And I could hear the crowd, I could hear the sound of it was fabulous.
Yeah, why didn't they wait for another week, Nigel, and see if the viewing figures stayed the same? They could save the licence payer millions of pounds about these entitled celebrities flouncing out of sports shows.
That was the biggest controversy we've had in television for ages. So, of course, people tune in to see how they're dealing with that. I mean, the idea that you could actually do programmes without any commentators, presenters or whatever...
Well, I think that's a terrible idea. I'm sure you agree.
I thought you might. So, I mean, but what the BBC have done now is we seem to have got an accommodation, which they should have got on Friday, and let's hope now this whole thing is over. I mean, when you think about it, a 35-word tweet which has dominated the news News for the last 6 days is pretty silly.
Well, it's deeply offensive, especially to the Jewish community, and I think it was a very, very serious breach. What I find much more interesting now as the story is moving on is that dog, his rescue dog, called
Very
Filbert.
nice dog.
It's named after... it's named after...
On a lot of the front page, you can see the lovely dog. What
and
breed
he
is it?
rescued it? It's a husky.
A husky.
And he rescued it in LA, as he only would. But what I don't get is why there's so much attention given to rescue dogs, OK? So what? It's a dog that someone rescued. You've got 2 rescue cats.
I have.
I've always had rescue cats. And Nigel, I believe you even had
I've got 2 cats, one of which just wandered in, so I count that as a rescue.
They never get mentioned.
But isn't
No.
the point that that's as close as he'll ever get to someone who's been rescued? Because his opinions on immigration, regardless of whether we agree with them or not, it doesn't affect his life in any way, shape or form.
But he did take a refugee once.
But he's got quite a big property, and he's probably got about 9 properties, for all I know, or
Look,
millions he's got.
I think Gary Lineker is absolutely rubbish. I think the amount of money he's paid, as a sports fan, for his contribution to my enjoyment of the game is...
Look, Bev and I keep offering to stand in for him this
Oh, and
Saturday
you
and do it.
You should.
For a third of the money,
We've
we'll
just
do it
realised you
together.
should do that. But I do like the fact that we live in a world where you can say what you think, even if it is on the taxpayer-funded channel.
Yeah. But what about the fact in his statement today, Bev, he's twisted the knife. I'm so glad to be back. Spirit of compromise. By the way, can I just repeat, it's appalling what this government's doing to people trying to cross the channel.
He's humiliated.
These genuine asylum seekers,
He's
and a lot of them are economic refugees.
He's utterly humiliated the BBC and proved them to be what they are, a bunch of weak-willed, spineless lefties.
But the point he seems to have arrived at is he can say that if you talk about the policy being appalling, I mean, what he actually described it as was cruel, which hit vulnerable people, that strikes me as fair comment. The bit that went completely wrong was turning around and saying the language being used is like 1930s Germany.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not. I mean, 1930s Germany was about a master race, about other races being inferior. So it had no comparison with that. Had he stuck to the fair comment bit, and that's what I'm guessing the BBC are coming up with their new social media guidance, that will be within the rules.
There was this little story in the paper today about other EU countries are looking potentially at processing asylum seekers offshore. Rather similar to Britain's policy, isn't it?
I know.
Well, we should be processing them abroad. We shouldn't actually have a rule whereby asylum seekers have to be in this country to claim asylum, because if you were able to do it elsewhere, that would cease the draw of crossing the channel.
Absolutely. OK, moving on. Junior doctors could earn more serving coffee at Pret, say their union. Junior doctors leaders have launched an advertising campaign ahead of a strike over pay, saying that NHS staff could earn more money serving coffee at Pret.
Which I doubt.
Which I very much doubt. I don't know why they chose Pret. Perhaps they pay more than any particular coffee chain. I don't know why they chose that one. But should they be asking for this much of a pay increase, Amanda, the junior doctors?
No, it's too much. And I do think that junior doctors are, when you look at the figures, they are pretty poorly paid. But my new friend, Rob, who actually works here and used to be, what are they called, those coffee maker people?
A barista.
A barista. Not to be confused with Beretta.
Yeah.
OK, that's the
very
cheese.
Important.
OK. He
nice
said
cheese
that,
too.
Very nice cheese. He said that if you were lucky as a full-time barista person... barista. You'd be taking home 20k.
Yeah.
Junior doctors starting about 32k.
Yeah,
I don't think that's enough. It's a really ugly metaphor. It's a bit like with the Gary Lineker story. You should be very careful what you say about the comparisons that you make.
There's a Pret on the way here, and I was aware of this story, and I popped in on my way in and said, I ask any of you, do any of you earn £33,000 a year? They looked at me,
I bet they just
nonplussed.
No, I think
one said, are you mad? They wouldn't tell me what they earn, but I think this union, as usual, your mates in the unions, Nigel, exaggerate.
Well, what they've done is they've taken the absolute lowest pay for a trainee for a trainee doctor. I mean, junior doctors go all the way up to consultants. I mean, a registrar who'd be earning, say, 58 grand a year is actually a junior doctor. The problem they've got here is that they're making a claim that you can defend as reasonable but not realistic. You can't go around with a claim for 35% in the way that nurses couldn't have claimed 19% realistically.
Which was a strategic mistake.
You have that situation where the salaries for the junior doctors does not include double bubble for working overtime, double bubble for working weekends. Their salaries are much higher than that, and within a few years they're usually on about 80k, and then they make the really big money. And we pay £1 million training them for them to go and live in Australia.
Yeah. I know. Well, I would write into their contract that they have to stay. They have to stay for 3 years at least after they've trained.
30 years.
Or they have to repay some of the training money.
And I'm just really worried that the NHS is in the final death throes of its existence.
Well, I think it probably is. I mean, that's the danger with the NHS needs urgent and root and branch reform if it's going to survive.
But not more money.
No,
more money for the nurses.
It's not necessarily about money. It's about reforming the system. Funding will come into it, but it's not about more money, it's a funding formula.
It's not the structure that was in place in 1948 cannot be the same now.
That's
the population is nearly double and we live a lot older.
Yeah.
OK.
Well,
thank you both, Amanda
you're
and
going to be back
Nigel,
later in the programme?
for now,
I'll think about it.
We want you back.
If Bev wants me back, I'm coming back.
I always want you back, Amanda. Now, is your child a mixed berry gender fluid muffin? Didn't think so. You're going to need to stay tuned to work out what that is all about. It's about gender ideology. Surprise, surprise. See you in 2 minutes.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236,
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Very good morning. Welcome back to The Point with me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce.
Well, he's back. It didn't last long, did it? Gary Lineker back doing Match of the Day on Saturday. In my view, Bev's view, a completely humiliation by climb down by the BBC, which is going to review what freelancers like Gary Lineker can say on social media. MPs and TV stars will have their say right here.
And putting lives at risk. Today, junior doctors walk out in an historic 3-day strike. They've demanded an enormous 35% pay rise. The government says it is completely unaffordable, but there's pressure on the Chancellor as a week of walkouts begin just days before the midweek budget.
Tears, cheers, and even an emotional support donkey. A big night at the Oscars in LA. Everywhere All, haven't watched it to be honest, sweeps the board as Brendan Fraser makes his Hollywood return. We've got all the gossip from the biggest night in La La Land.
If you're just tuning in, where have you been? You've missed a lot of action. We've still got more to come, though, this morning. Send us your views, GBViews at gbnews.uk, won't you? But first of all, here is your latest news with Tamsin Roberts.
Beth, thank you. Good morning from the GB Newsroom. It's 2 minutes past 11. TV presenter Gary Lineker says he's delighted after securing an agreement with the BBC, which will see him return to Match of the Day this weekend. It's after he was taken off air over a tweet on the government's illegal migration bill. The BBC Director General, Tim Davie, has apologised and says Lineker will abide by the editorial guidelines until a review of the corporation's social media policy is complete. Earlier, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer said the spotlight really needs to be on the BBC's chairman.
I think Richard Sharp's position is increasingly untenable. Obviously, there's a process going on. But I think most people watching the complete mess of the last few days would say, how on earth is he still in position? And Gary Lineker's been taken off air. This is a mess of the BBC's own making.
The Chancellor and the Bank of England have secured the sale of collapsed Silicon Valley Bank UK to HSBC. The UK branch was put into insolvency last night after the California-based parent company had its assets seized by US regulators on Friday. Jeremy Hunt says the government had worked urgently to look after the tech sector. More than 200 companies were facing risks to cash flow before the intervention, with around £2.5 billion in capital locked in the lender.
All those really important companies that had deposits with Silicon Valley Bank UK can access their deposits, can access normal banking services as of this morning. It's a very important outcome. No taxpayers' money has been used, and I think it's a result of a lot of hard work. But I also think it shows that the UK has great resilience in its financial system, that we're able to step in with one of our biggest UK banks in a situation like this and protect a very important sector.
Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary Jonathan Ashworth told GB News the sale has helped the whole country.
It's important that we've seen this arrangement this morning. I mean, a lot of our tech sector, our life sciences sector would have been severely impacted. I've actually had constituents get in touch with me who would have been impacted as well. So, look, obviously everybody will want to look at the details very carefully today, but this does seem like it has been an important intervention for what would have been something which would have had serious economic consequences for many jobs and businesses in the UK.
The Prime Minister has pledged £5 billion over 2 years to the armed forces. Rishi Sunak met with his Australian counterpart, Anthony Albanese, in San Diego ahead of unveiling a major new AUKUS defence pact between the UK, US and Australia. Plans to be announced with President Joe Biden include supplying nuclear-powered submarines to Australia. It was signed by the three nations in 2021 to boost defences and counter China's threat in the Indo-Pacific region. Junior doctors are mounting picket lines outside hospitals, beginning 3 days of industrial action. The British Medical Association says junior doctors in England have suffered a 26% real terms cut to their pay since 2008. The union says newly qualified medics earn just over £14 an hour, which is less than a barista in a coffee shop. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, has called it incredibly disappointing the union has declined to discuss pay on the condition strikes are paused. Voting gets underway for Nicola Sturgeon's replacement as Scotland's First Minister later today. Tens of thousands of SNP members have 2 weeks to vote for their next party leader. 3 candidates are in the running, with Kate Forbes, Humza Yousaf and Ash Regan all standing. Ms Sturgeon quit last month after more than 8 years in the role. Police will prioritise freedom of speech in non-crime hate incidents. It means they'll only record so-called non-crime hate incidents when it's absolutely necessary and not simply because someone is offended. The Home Secretary says the draft guidelines will go before Parliament later. Britain's set to be hit by further wintry blasts today, with 51 flood alerts in place across the UK. The Met Office has issued a yellow warning for strong winds also across parts of England and Wales, with gusts of up to 65 miles per hour forecast and travel disruption expected. Whilst in Scotland, yellow warnings for snow and ice are in place until tomorrow morning, where temperatures have plunged to -8 degrees over the weekend. Everything, Everywhere, All at Once swept the board at the 95th Oscars awards ceremony last night. It won Best Film, Best Director and Best Original Screenplay. Its leading lady, Michelle Yeoh, took home the award for Best Actress. Elsewhere, Brendan Fraser won Best Actor for The Whale. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Bev and Andrew.
Well, guess what? Big surprise. The BBC, they've rolled over. Of course they have. They've reinstated Gary Lineker, who'll be back on air on Match of the Day this weekend, even though on Saturday viewing figures were up by 500,000 without the privileged, pampered, overpaid presenter.
Is this a triumph for free speech? Let me know. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Saturday's coverage was, of course, heavily disrupted after presenters and commentators pulled out in solidarity with the host as the Match of the Day programme on Saturday ran highlights for only 20 minutes.
And he's tweeted, of course, Gary Lineker, saying how thrilled he is to be back. And then, of course, he's twisted the knife by repeating all his old offensive stuff about the government's very sensible, in my view, stop the boats policy.
He said, I'd like to thank Tim Davie for his understanding during this difficult period. He has an almost impossible job keeping everybody happy, particularly in the area of impartiality. I am delighted that we'll continue to fight the good fight together.
Yeah, right.
Well, you see, that's interesting, isn't it? Because what he is saying there, he's making that statement about immigration. You know, all of his allies, all of his teammates, all of his co-presenters who basically said, we stand by him. I'm not sure what they were standing up for. They probably don't know. Probably just somebody called and said...
A night off work.
You know, what were they standing up for? Was it free speech or was it pro-immigration? They probably don't know themselves.
No, I know. And the fact is, a lot of people, the vast majority, every poll we've seen has suggested there's overwhelming public support for the Stop the Boats policy because it cannot go on 45,000 a year. People dying at sea, coming here illegally, coming from Albania, coming from India. Neither country are places of conflict. They had to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. So our national reporter Ellie Costello is outside Broadcasting House this morning. Ellie, we've just read out that tweet from Gary Lineker. What is the latest from down there?
Yes, good morning to you both. Gary Lineker is set to return to our screens this weekend to present Match of the Day. It's after a pretty bruising weekend for the BBC. Their sports coverage looking almost unrecognisable, really, wasn't it? There was a poll over the weekend from YouGov, a snap poll, where 53% of people said the BBC had got this wrong. They shouldn't have taken Gary Lineker off air. So it does seem as though the BBC realised they couldn't allow this fallout to continue, and they worked very hard and very quickly to reinstate Gary Lineker. There has been a statement in the past hour from the Director General of the BBC, Tim Davie, who says that Gary is a valued part of the BBC. I know how much the BBC means to Gary, and I look forward to him presenting our coverage this weekend. He also went on to announce an independent review into the BBC's social media guidelines, with a particular focus on freelance presenters who do not present news and current affairs. So that is Gary Lineker, of course. He does go on as well to recognise that there are grey areas in that social media policy that need addressing. So that is something that is going to continue in the next few days and weeks. He goes on to say that Gary Lineker is going to abide by the current social media guidelines whilst that independent review takes place. Gary Lineker hasn't confirmed that, though, and he has been very busy tweeting in the past hour or so on his personal Twitter page, and he starts by thanking his BBC Sports colleagues for their show of solidarity, he calls it. He goes on to say, football is a team game and their backing has been overwhelming. He says, I've been presenting sport on the BBC for almost 3 decades and I'm immeasurably proud of working for the best and fairest broadcaster in the world, and he can't wait to get back in the Match of the Day chair on Saturday. But he goes on to say a final thought, and that is, however difficult the last few days have been, it simply doesn't compare with having to flee your home from persecution or war to seek refuge in a land far away. It's heartwarming to have seen the empathy towards their plight from so many of you. And his fourth and final tweet, we remain a country of predominantly tolerant, welcoming and generous people. Thank you. So Gary Lineker almost instantly takes the opportunity to double down on those previous comments that he made last Tuesday that snowballed into this row about BBC impartiality and freedom of expression as well. He stands firm by those comments, that is clear to see. He does thank Tim Davie for what he calls his understanding during this difficult period. So it does seem as though it's been a respectful agreement between Gary Lineker and the BBC, but there will be changes ahead, it looks like, for BBC freelancers and what they can and can't post on social media. But Gary Lineker will be appearing on our screens this weekend, and by the looks of things, at least so far, he is going to continue to keep tweeting.
Okay. Costello,
Thank you, Ellie.
Broadcasting. Sanctimonious. He can't stand the sanctity of this man.
You can still want to have safe routes of passage
on.
for people
Nothing
who are seeking
Nothing compares.
asylum.
What does he know about it?
And still support this
How many
immigration
of these people
bill.
how many of them are economic migrants?
Well,
He
there's
doesn't
too
know.
much nuance in that,
How many
isn't
people
there?
come from Albania and India, which is not a country which is a place of conflict? They're in a safe country called France. Get over it.
Yeah, but the thing is, there's too much nuance to get over in tweets.
But he's now saying to the BBC, what are you going to do about it? That's what he's doing. Liam Halligan's in here to talk about something else. We're going to talk about Silicon Valley Bank, but I want to know what you think about... oh, we've got a package. Sorry, Liam. Silicon Valley Bank has been sold to HSBC. The Chancellor announced that this morning. That's Jeremy Hunt. It was put into insolvency over the weekend, had its assets seized by US regulators on Friday.
More than 200 tech companies faced cash flow risk because of this, with around £2.5 billion in capital locked in. The lender, Jeremy Hunt, confirmed that all customer deposits would be protected under the deal. Here's what he said.
All those really important companies that had deposits with Silicon Valley Bank UK can access their deposits, can access normal banking services as of this morning. It's a very important outcome. No taxpayers' money has been used, and I think it's a result of a lot of hard work. But I also think it shows that the UK has great resilience in its financial system, that we're able to step in with one of our biggest UK banks in a situation like this and protect a very important sector.
Jeremy Hunt there. Liam Halligan is with us. He looks sort of rattled. I mean, he never looks like the strongest man in the world, does he? He doesn't appear to have much of a backbone, in my opinion. I'm sorry, I don't like him. I don't trust him as far as I can throw him. But he looked like a rabbit in headlights even more than usual.
He probably hasn't had much sleep because what will have been happening over the weekend is a negotiation between HSBC, Europe's biggest bank, British Bank, of course, or a British-origined bank, and the government and the creditors of Silicon Valley Bank. Financial markets have remained relatively calm in London this morning, though in pre-trading in New York, obviously the stock exchange in New York hasn't opened yet, but in pre-trading in New York, the shares of Silicon Valley Bank are down by 60%. So there's going to be a bloodbath in terms of New York markets. The question is, does this sort of contagion spread out, and does it lead to financial turmoil? Will it undermine what the Chancellor's trying to do in his budget on Wednesday? I'll tell you what he will do on Wednesday, because he is very much trying to present this as a safe pair of hands. It's the Treasury's budget rather than the politician's budget. He'll say, you see why I have to be cautious? You see why I can't freeze corporation tax. You see why I can't spend more money to get the economy going and need to be steady as she goes because of this potential turmoil on financial markets.
I can remember in 2008 and the banking collapse, my mum, a pensioner in floods of tears, she lived in a council house, all the money she owned in the world was in Northern Rock, and there were queues of people outside. Was she going to lose everything? People watching this will be wondering, how would the collapse of this bank impacted us here in Britain? No, none of us like us would have a personal bank account there, but a lot of tech companies were tied up with it.
Indeed. Well, on breakfast this morning, I called it a kind of sliding doors moment, you know, the cheesy Gwyneth Paltrow movie. We would be talking about nothing else now, even with Gary Lineker, if this would be absolutely dominating the media and politics for the next week, budget or no budget, if that bank had collapsed, because you would have had people queuing up outside other banks here in the UK.
They panicked.
And the thing about banks is once that genie is out of the bottle, people do panic. People do say, I want all my money now.
And they won't trust Jeremy Hunt to say, don't panic.
Yeah, of course they won't. And that will cause the very panic that the government's trying to nip in the bud. So I don't know what kind of deal HSBC have cut. Obviously, the headline figure is that they bought this UK subsidiary of this US bank for $1, but there's lots of debt. There's no government money, but does that mean that the government somehow supported the write-offs of debt? We just don't know, and it will all be commercially confidential for a long time. It's one for historians. But we have to say it's got to be, on balance, a good thing that they've come to some agreement. So companies with their money in Silicon Valley Bank, the UK subsidiary, they can carry on working, they can carry on paying their employees, they can carry on knowing that their cash that was in the bank on Friday is still in the bank on Monday, albeit in a different bank. That has to be good.
How does a chance to persuade a bank like HSBC to take on this bank with its debt?
Well, we don't know the full horror of the balance sheet of Silicon Valley Bank in the US and the extent to which it impinges on the UK. We're told the UK bank is, you know, largely separate, but of course it's part of the same legal entity. We know Silicon Valley Bank has incurred huge losses because it was quite racy in the way it was investing its deposits. It was investing its deposits in bonds, the price of which has fallen as interest rates have risen around the world. The bank kind of bet on the idea that interest rates would stay low forever and central banks around the world will keep printing money forever, whereas, of course, that was never going to happen. But it has to be a good thing that this bank in the UK has been solved. So we'll talk about some market turmoil today. By tomorrow, it should be part of history rather than the present day.
And it's not going to be the first of many banks, Liam?
We don't really know, Bev. What we do know is that interest rates have now gone up and the whole era of cheap money that we've never really managed to escape since that global financial crisis is now over. And a lot of people will have bet that it would never be over because they didn't want to believe it was over. As Warren Buffett said, the famous American investor, it's only when the tide goes out that you see who's swimming naked, right? And there will be financial institutions around the world that have been swimming naked, taking too many risks. But what I would say is that the UK banking regulatory system is now significantly stronger than it was in 2008.
Good.
All the more reason it doesn't get looser, and maybe this will be a warning shot to those who financial vested interests who've lobbying for looser regulation.
Yeah, sure.
All right, that's Liam Halligan, our business and economics editor. Still to come, we're going to be speaking to leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice. I've just bumped into him outside. He's going to give us his thoughts on the Stop the Boat spill, and of course, he's going to have a view on Gary Lineker. See you in a few minutes.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 11:22. We're just giggling here with some of your responses on social media. We've been talking about Gary Lineker, of course, on the BBC. Gary Lineker is going to be back on air on Saturday. And Simon Harris has tweeted, GB News lecturing on impartiality is like Bernard Matthews lecturing on veganism.
Fabulous.
But you know what? You come here for our opinions, right? I don't like impartiality. I like partiality. Call me old-fashioned.
Exactly. Now, it's the King's first Commonwealth Day service today. As a monarch, he's delivering the message in person, marking the occasion from the great pulpit in Westminster Abbey.
Senior members of the royal family will gather with the King in the church, where he'll be crowned in 2 months' time.
Also, the big question, can he keep the Commonwealth together during his reign?
So we are joined now by former BBC correspondent Michael Cole. Michael, good morning. Lovely to see you again. So some people will be saying, the Commonwealth is an outdated institution. Why do we need to devote a whole day to it? Explain to our viewers why this is a heavyweight day in the political royal calendar.
Good morning, Beverley, and good morning, Andrew. You're absolutely right. It was 5 years ago that the late Queen said it was her sincere wish that the then Prince Charles would succeed her as head of the Commonwealth. It wasn't a given, but who was going to disagree with the Queen? And by acclamation, he became head of the Commonwealth. It's a very important role because the Commonwealth is an association, a free association of 54 independent nations, not all former British colonies. Mozambique was a Portuguese colony, Rwanda was German, and then it was Belgium. Any country can apply to join if they believe in freedom, the rule of law, and also brotherhood and equality. And it does good in the world. It is not just a talking shop. It is a force for good. And it is important in many ways that it stays strong and united. And I'm sure the King will do his best to make sure that that continues. I'm afraid he hasn't started very well because his first overseas trips are going to be to France and then on to Germany. And that hasn't gone down well because the Queen had been the Queen for 5 years before she went to France and 13 years before she made her first state visit to the then West Germany. As we remember, people as old as me, she spent the early years of her her reign, touring the Commonwealth for months on end. And we used to go to the cinema and pay to go and see newsreels, colour newsreels, can you believe it, of her trips to Australia or around the Caribbean or wherever it happened to be, and across Canada. And great films they were too. So I think that's a tactical mistake. But I'm sure his commitment will be as wholeheartedly as was hers. The Commonwealth was set up mainly, the King George VI, was heavily involved in it in 1949, and the Queen has made it the centrepiece of her reign. As she's presided over the end of empires, as the countries have become independent, in that way she's kept it all together, and I'm sure the King Charles III, will not want to preside over its dismemberment.
Michael, you know his decision to go to France and Germany will have been made for him by government, because they will advise him. They'll tell Rishi Sunak said where he wants him to go. He wants to improve relations with European countries, particularly post-Brexit and all the rest of the stuff.
Absolutely, but the King acts on the advice of the government of the day, and always shall be. That's how it is in a constitutional monarchy, which we're lucky enough to have. There are other strains and stresses, because amid those 54 countries, there are 15 realms. In other words, he is king of 15 countries, and each one of those countries is on the Westminster model, i.e. the head of state is the monarch and it has a prime minister. And most of those countries are pretty happy countries, but some of them, with the death of the Queen, are thinking about becoming republics. But you know something? There's nothing more modern about a republic, because when the republics became hopelessly corrupt in ancient Rome, they replaced them. And what did they replace them with? They replaced them with a monarchy.
Michael, we can't have you here this morning without asking you, as a former BBC employee, what are your thoughts on the current Gary Lineker situation? Are you controversial on Twitter?
The BBC has caved in. It's one of the worst days in its 100-year history. It is quite shameful. It's pusillanimous behaviour on behalf of the corporation that I work for a fifth of its existence. Now, let me just tell you, when I was a BBC reporter, I filed thousands, literally thousands of stories. I never expressed a personal opinion. I never made a political point. And my work, not me, my work won 2 Royal Television Society awards. And during that time, the most I was ever paid was £47,000 a year. And I was shot at, I covered wars, I was beaten up and put in hospital in Northern Ireland. I contracted hepatitis in Guatemala. Why did I do that for that money? It's because I believed in public service broadcasting, not my self-promotion. And I think this cover, this excuse that he's a freelance and therefore can say what he likes. He is the face of the BBC in exactly the way Richard Dimbleby was in the 1950s and 1960s, until he died tragically long. And Richard Dimbleby lived on 13-week contracts, but he was the face of the BBC, and he never made an outrageous comment of this kind, because he knew his responsibility. Just a second, Beverley, I'm nearly finished. The point is that he didn't need codes of conduct. He didn't need guidelines. He was a man of integrity who knew what was right and what was wrong.
But you see, isn't that different because he worked in news? Gary Lineker used to kick a bag of air around very well, I believe. And now he's a sports presenter, and surely he's allowed to express his opinion, if we agree with it or not.
Yes, we've seen the tail wagging the dog here. You see, the BBC is a cornerstone of our imperfect liberal democracy. It's important around the world. Its integrity, its impartiality. It's taken a long, long time to establish that. You build a reputation over decades and you can lose it in 5 minutes. And this has weakened the BBC's reputation for integrity. Yes, I'm quite sure that Gary Lineker's got lots of contracts. I'm quite sure he would not mind wearing the armour of a martyr in this matter. And I'm quite sure all his very, very rich sports friends will gather around him. Of course they will, because they don't want to be seen to be out of step with the great Gary Lineker. But has anybody come out with this with any credit in this. Certainly the BBC has not, by bending the knee to him. And whether he's come out by showing, well, you find an epithet for it. But certainly, is that the way to behave in life? To actually say, stamp your foot, I'm right, you're wrong? The BBC is very important to all of us. If it's not important to all of us, it should be disbanded and the Royal Charter should not be renewed. But while we have respect for it, I think you have to respect it. And there hasn't been respect.
OK, thank you, Michael. Always lovely to hear from you, Michael Cole there. I think the penny's dropping for me as to why I feel that I want to defend his right to speak out is because I don't have a high opinion of the BBC. That's why I don't.
Well, but it's hugely popular with so many people who won't share that view. And I think Michael Cole's right. It is the most extraordinary. I thought the U-turn would have taken a few more days. And to say, oh, we're doing a review into what freelancers can say on social media when Lineker has been breaching those guidelines for years and years. It's a fig leaf, it's pathetic, it's pitiful. It is game, set and match capitulation to Lineker. He calls the shots.
Yep, right, we've got to go to the news. Let us know what you think, GBViews at gbnews.uk. Still to come, should children as young as 7 be told they might be mixed berry gender fluid muffins? That's right, here's Tamsin.
Bev, thank you. Here are the headlines from the GB newsroom at 11:32. TV presenter Gary Lineker says he's delighted after securing an agreement with the BBC, which will see him return to Match of the Day this weekend. It's after he was taken off air over a tweet on the government's illegal migration bill. The BBC Director General, Tim Davie, has apologised and says Lineker will abide by the editorial guidelines until a review of the corporation's social media policy is complete. The Chancellor and the Bank of England have secured the sale of the collapsed Silicon Valley Bank UK to HSBC. The UK branch was put into insolvency last night after the California-based parent company had its assets seized by US regulators on Friday. Jeremy Hunt says the government worked urgently to look after the tech sector, confirming all customer deposits would be protected with no cost to the taxpayer. The Prime Minister has pledged £5 billion over 2 years to the armed forces. Rishi Sunak met with his Australian counterpart, Anthony Albanese, in San Diego ahead of unveiling a major new AUKUS defence pact between the UK, US and Australia. Plans to be announced with the US President Joe Biden include supplying nuclear-powered submarines to Australia. It was signed by the three nations in 2021 to boost defences and counter China's threat in the Indo-Pacific region. Junior doctors are mounting picket lines outside hospitals today, beginning 3 days of industrial action. The British Medical Association says junior doctors in England have suffered a 26% real terms cut to their pay since 2008. The union says newly qualified medics earn just over £14 an hour, which it says is less than a barista in a coffee shop. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, has called it disappointing the union has declined to discuss pay on the condition strikes are paused. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Bev and Andrew.
So I don't know whether you saw the Oscars last night. Did you watch any of it? No.
Too late.
Me neither, but you didn't have to because we've got all the best bits for you, including Hugh Grant and the grumpiest interview in Hollywood. Find out why shortly.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
A very good morning. It is 11:37. This is To The Point with me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce.
And it's the Stop the Boats bill. It's going to be voted on in the Commons tonight, 10 p.m. You know what it's all about. It's removing asylum seekers who arrive on small boats across the Channel.
The changes are expected to provoke a backlash in the Commons as senior Tories prepare to join opposition MPs in challenging the legislation.
Well, delighted to say joining us in the studio now is the leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice. Richard Tice, the Tories think they're onto a vote winner here. Whether or not legislation works or not is another matter. Do you think they are onto a vote winner here?
No, not at all, Andrew, because we've heard it all before. This time last year, the Tories were saying we've got the great new Nationality and Borders Bill and that's going to stop the boats, sort out the problem. We heard all that waffle and spin, and guess what? More and more are coming over. And what we see is the more laws they put in place, the more money they send to France, what happens? More migrants come to the UK. This will make no difference whatsoever. It'll act as a magnet for the vile people smugglers. And if it gets through the Houses of Parliament at all, which in itself is a big question. The only way you stop the boats, Andrew, is you have to pick them up safely and take them back to France, which you can do under existing laws.
Well, Bev and I talked to somebody on this programme last week saying just that, your colleague Ben Habib, who said also Germany has a relationship whereby they say nobody comes in from Albania.
Correct.
We're still letting them in from Albania and then trying to kick them out. Why do we do everything in reverse when the legislation's there already to stop them?
Because we've got woke, wet, incompetent Home Office caseworkers, which is why one of our key six-point plan is that you've got to have a whole new Department of Immigration staffed by people who believe in the cause of secure borders, knowing who's coming in and who's going out. It's not rocket science, but it's important for safety of British citizens.
Are you frustrated by all of this focus on Gary Lineker's opinion on this story, as opposed to holding Suella Braverman and her policy to account?
Yeah, look, I mean, Gary's Gary, and it has sort of blown up into a whole sort of broader picture about the BBC and all that good stuff. Look, my view on the Lineker thing is that he clearly broke the corporate guidelines. He was in breach of the editorial guidelines. He was in breach of the social media guidelines. And there's no question. He also brought the BBC into disrepute. I mean, it's an absolute shambles. They're there to give the news, not to be the news. All the other presenters, likewise, brought the whole channel into disrepute, and they should be properly sanctioned. Many people will be happy they've reached an agreement, but it's an absolute turning point for the relationship of the BBC and the UK population. Why should we be forced to pay a licence fee if it's no longer going to be an impartial trusted public service broadcast.
But it hasn't been that, Richard. It hasn't been an impartial, trusted...
But that's what we've been told.
For such a long time.
You're right, but we were told that it's supposed to be. And if it's not, and if we accept that...
That's what the Charter says.
And that's what the Charter... If we accept that, then that's absolutely fine. I'm happy to pay let's say, a fee for BBC News to be impartial, but if I don't want all the other stuff, I don't want to be forced to pay.
And have you seen his tweet today saying how thrilled he is and how grateful he is to Tim Davie, the Director-General? And by the way, my view on this bill is he's effectively cocked a snook at the BBC. He's untouchable now. He will say and do what he likes.
And the point is, no one is indispensable. Interesting that the viewership on Saturday evening went up by 500,000. I wasn't one of them, but nevertheless.
Nor me.
Look, I think they're overpaid. I think they've acted like prima donnas. It would have been a great opportunity, actually, to say, do you know what? You can all disappear for 6 months. We'll bring in some great young new blood, save the taxpayer a load of cash, and I suspect no one would have cared.
And wouldn't they have been presenters who have no opinions, who aren't politically engaged, to sit there every day and talk about the the offside rule and who got a red card? I don't want to live in that world, Richard.
But you do if you're a football fan, Bev. That's what you go on to hear about, the football techniques, the tactics, who was fastest, who's fittest, who's got an injury problem. That's what you watch Match of the Day for. Those are opinions. He doesn't tend to talk about immigration
during a live broadcast. That would be weird.
He'd be in serious trouble over that.
That would be.
He doesn't do he does draw a line between his sports presenting and his political
I guess where we're at is that this has been it's been a seismic moment which will clarify however long this review takes. Let's hope it's a couple of weeks rather than a couple of years.
Can I just stop it? What is the point of the review of what social media output freelancers have when Gary Lineker has been breaching the guidelines for the last 6 to 8 years? Why haven't they already got the guidance in place?
Because they
have, and he's ignored it.
Correct, and because they're incompetent, and because he thinks he's bigger than the BBC.
He is.
Look, let's sort it out. This issue about freelance, though, is absolutely irrelevant. He's there representing the BBC. He's part of the face of the BBC, and he needs to.
It's one of the most famous parts of the BBC.
He needs to comply with the BBC guidelines and rules.
So here you go, Richard Tice. If he came out and did a tweet tomorrow saying, "I'm going to vote reform in the next election," you'd be a big fan of his for saying that, wouldn't you?
Then absolutely everything's fine.
Exactly. That's my point.
I'm only joking.
You would be a tough one, though, wouldn't it?
I hope you're joking.
It would be a tough one.
No, but the truth is, if he had come out supporting government policy, he'd have been fired instantly because the lefties at the BBC wouldn't have liked it.
Would be outraged by somebody supporting a Tories.
They'd have been going nuts.
Did you notice the number of people who pointed out Alistair Campbell, who was all over the BBC saying it's outrageous, defending Gary Lineker, and who produces Alistair Campbell's very tedious podcast? Gary Lineker's own company. Of course it does. And the BBC don't declare an interest.
Richard, I can't have you here without asking about your partner, Isabel Oakeshott, responsible for the Matt Hancock WhatsApp messages in The Telegraph, for people who don't know. How is she?
She's OK, thank you very much for asking. It's been an extraordinary 2 weeks. Without question, the response has proved that it's overwhelmingly in the public interest. She's had so many emotional, heart-wrenching messages and emails from members of the public. She is absolutely no doubt at all it was the right thing to do. The way the industry has behaved, frankly, has been nothing short of disgusting, appalling. Many people who wouldn't know a scoop of it, slap them in the face, need to, I think, give themselves a really long, hard look about how they've responded.
Has she got a book in this?
Has she got a book?
Because it's been a major world event. International.
It has been a huge international event. She's done media all over the world because what we are seeing is that actually we've seen how leaders abuse power, and absolute power leads to absolute corruption, and we've seen that with these messages. I think there are huge lessons to learn, the most important of which is we can't wait a decade for a £300 million public inquiry. We need the answers this year.
It'll be longer than that. Bloody Sunday, 40 years.
You know, I'll be having retirement parties.
Are they going to change the parameters of the COVID inquiry now because of Isabel's messages?
I certainly hope so. Already the inquiry chair has said it won't take a decade. We'll hold us to account that. Yeah. What they need to do is they need to run everything in parallel, rapidly. Do you know they've got over 60 barristers on the job? They've committed over 116 million quid on 5-year contracts.
That's outrageous. That's scandalous.
It's a civil service. Kick the can down the road until everyone's long gone. It's not good enough in our country. It is not good enough.
They've been doing it for years. Iraq as well. How long did that take?
It's,
12 years?
It's a scandal, absolute scandal. Well, thank her from me for keeping the conversation alive.
Now, lots of texts and emails coming in. Anne says, Lineker reinstating, I'm spitting feathers. If I could afford the fine, I would omit paying my licence fee. John says, what are the BBC doing? Why aren't they disciplining the other employees who walked out in solidarity with Gary?
The thing is, Anne, you can cancel your licence fee and just not access BBC services. I've got, like I said, I've got many friends and family who've done that recently. You don't need your licence fee to keep GB News on day and night. John has said, what are the BBC doing to discipline all the other... You just read that.
Yeah.
And Sue-Ann said, if ever there was a reason to stop taxpayer funding of this outdated institution, Gary Lineker is it. BBC, stop taking the money.
Yeah, and the Mail says, I'm dumbfounded. This man has the audacity to advocate limitless refugee numbers, and in doing so, it's the taxpayer that would be responsible for the burden of doing so. Well, lots of those coming in.
Yeah, Tim, thank you. It says, come on, Bev and Andrew. Gary has won the argument, and a presenter's wealth should not be a factor.
Well, he hasn't convinced me.
And it's not just his wealth, it's our taxpayers' money. That's why it's relevant. Ordinarily, I have no problem with people earning plenty of money. It's been a good versus a right-wing bad competition where good has won hands down. Get over it.
Yeah. Now, back in the studio, political editor at the Sunday Mirror and all-round political doyen Nigel Nelson, and my great friend Amanda Patel, Daily Mail columnist. We've got to talk about this mixed berry, gender fluid.
All right, so it's in Wales, funnily enough. Wales just seems to lose its way every time I look at a story.
Run by the Labour Party, remember?
Where is that happening? It's happening in Wales. First Minister Mark Drakeford determined to push gender ideology. Critics have claimed after the emergence of an agenda pamphlet, Amanda, 170 pages, which is telling us that there's no such thing as biological sex, even just being male and female, and that there are hundreds of genders.
I think the more interesting thing about this, and which I found really shocking, actually, is that they're now identifying, they're doing this blueberry thing. They're going to give children either muffins with blueberries in, which identify masculinity and anything else you might want to think about in that, and raspberry ones identify girls. This morning I had a whole pile of blueberries on my Weetabix, OK? I did not realise that I was actually eating male parts.
Yes.
I did not realise that. Does that make me trans?
Well,
because I love blueberries and I don't like raspberries.
Nigel, you're not going to defend this nonsense, are you?
Hang on a second.
Here do we go. He is. We know he is. The voice of the wokerati, Nigel Nelson.
This should be age appropriate, and the idea that 7-year-olds are being taught about this doesn't sound like it is age appropriate. But I wouldn't mind seeing the whole report to see how it's done. What they're talking about here is the idea about using the blueberry muffins is that you show that you can have one gender, which would be a blueberry muffin, that would be male. One gender could be a raspberry muffin and female. Then you have a mixed muffin, which you break open and say...
Yeah, but Nigel...
Why can't they just be a boy or a girl?
Nigel, that means I'm a bloke.
So
that means I must be self-identifying as a bloke, because I eat blueberries all the time.
I think we leave your breakfast out of it, Amanda.
Why?
On the basis of this.
I'm feeling sick already.
This is a teaching aid, basically.
But why does a teacher need this aid? 170 pages to talk to 7-year-olds?
What they're trying to say is that you can be born a biological sex,
can be
male
born
and
a
female.
Blueberry.
Yeah.
But your gender, as in how masculine you are or how feminine you are, is fluid, and therefore we all sit in some sort of gender spectrum.
But wouldn't you say there's something sexist about saying blues for boys and pink for girls?
Yes.
I mean,
this experiment does go on a bit.
It's very old-fashioned.
They then show balloons, which are...
What are the balloons for?
The balloons are to show that...
Are we past the watershed?
Balloon, it's for a girl, blue balloon for a boy. There is no gender fluid balloon, and that's to show that you can't pigeonhole people.
Aren't 7-year-olds too young to be taught about gender fluidity?
Yes. I think the way this conversation used to go was good, which is to say girls can be feminine and they can sometimes
tomboys
be
as well.
More traditional stereotypes of male, and boys have to sometimes be a little bit more female and talk about their feelings and all the stuff that we've come to terms with. But somehow they're turning the volume up on this and pushing it so far in a way that I think confuses kids.
Well, there is a review going on, and there's a government review going on. So every 3 years they do actually review relationship and sex education, and it is now time for that review. The one that Rishi Sunak actually announced last week was already happening. And that's probably right. And you've got then the head of Ofsted, Amanda Spielman, and she's saying that one of the problems is there are minimum standards for teaching this, but no maximum. And what they're looking at is whether more regulation is needed.
Can I just say the last thing? Who decided there were 72 genders? Who is the authority that decided?
But I'm just going back to Bev's point, is that, you know, I don't know what you were like as a young girl.
You look like a boy.
So did I. I used to pass off as a boy the whole time.
Till I was about...
They used to call me and my brothers
frankly,
the
till I
Patel
grew
lads.
boobs.
And if I'd had my way, I loved all boy things.
Me
I
too.
didn't... And if I'd been born today, I imagine that could have transformed into something else. You would have been introducing Adam Patel today.
Oh.
Yeah, but this is the thing.
At which point you're supposed to leap in, Andrew, and say,
you look like a
as
much
your
better
darling
Mandy
friend,
Patel.
I am...
Mandy Patel.
No, the other thing as well is a lot of this about gender is actually quite homophobic, as strange as that sounds.
It is.
There are children who are young teens, whatever, who are thinking they may be gay and attracted to the same sex, who are then saying, in that case, I mustn't be in the right biological sex. I need to change my sex. Just be who you are.
We've got to move on to the Oscars because it was a big night at the weekend. Who here has seen the film that won everything?
Me.
What was it called?
It's called Everywhere, Everything, the most terrible movie you're ever going to see in your life. And I lasted for about 45 minutes and thought, I cannot believe I rented this.
Yeah.
What's it about?
It's about a woman who goes backwards like this all the time, and she's trans-universe, and she's a refugee
word again.
who runs... trans-universe, not trans.
OK, that's a
She's not trans. She's
Asian. Just need to clarify that.
And she exists in 2 different parallel universes, and she goes all weird and they're refugees. And it's supposed to be the most... I thought it was absolutely rubbish. It took 107 million in the box office last year. The movie I love, and which we've watched together, Andrew, about 5 times, Top Gun Maverick, that took... I've got the notes here. It's always bad. That took 1.5 billion.
And got 1 Oscar.
And got 1 Oscar.
A technical.
Yeah.
What are they thinking? It's just woke and it's just totally out of touch.
I mean, I haven't
with what
seen this
people
film,
want to
so
watch.
I can't...
Don't watch it, Nigel.
I thought All Quiet on the Western Front deserves...
I saw that.
That
Very powerful.
That was really good. The only thing I'd say about Top Gun Maverick, great movie, fantastic action movie, a bit kind of cliched.
Well,
sort of
how
thing
dare you? Is human endeavour and courage and fighting for your country, are those things cliched?
No,
honestly, Nigel, where's your patriotism?
It is a straightforward sort of hero winning out.
But also, I've never seen a more obvious shoe-in for the Oscar than the guy who played Elvis, and he didn't get it. Unbelievable. No, it came to from that film that Amanda said was hopeless.
Let's do one more story before we go, guys. I want to do this one about statues of old white men like the Duke of Wellington and Admiral Lord Nelson, named after you, Nigel, could be destroyed because they may be offensive to diverse modern public. Welsh government advices. There we go again.
Your Welsh government, mate. Labour. Been in power for 20
I'm against
years.
this one.
They've lost it.
Leave history alone.
Yeah.
And whether these people are slavers... whether they're heroes like the Duke of Wellington and Lord Nelson, we just stop making modern-day judgments about something that happened a long time ago.
Nigel, don't you think it's white middle-class men and women who are making these decisions that they think these things will offend diversity?
Well, whoever is making those decisions, I mean, simply leave the whole thing alone. That, you know, it's our history. So we may not approve nowadays of chopping off the heads of spouses, but we don't then go and burn Holbein's pictures of Henry VIII.
No, quite.
And that's the point. We just leave things as they are, and by all means explain to people the background to it. So if a kid needs to learn about these things, they can look at a statue and say, hey, mummy, what's that man about? What did he do? And you get an explanation for it.
This report, Amanda, also said that there were few Welsh people of black or Asian heritage commemorated across Wales. Surely the way to help people of black or Asian heritage is to encourage them into positions rather than stress about the fact that there are no statues of them. Look forward, not back.
Bev, all that may be true, but I've got to say, and Andrew will understand this more than anyone, I still can't get over the thought of eating those blueberries this morning.
I'm just going to put you off. Are the blueberries out tomorrow morning? What are you going to have instead on your Weetabix?
I'm going to have... No, I won't have blueberries. Maybe if I mash them up. Oh, no. That's not good, is it?
Here's the thing about diversity in Wales. Why not have a statue to Shirley Bassey, one of the greatest Welsh women in history?
Why not?
Why not modern?
No,
she's still performing in her 80s.
Because she's white.
She's fantastic. No, she's black.
Oh, you're right.
She is.
Yeah, no,
she was born in Tiger Bay. I've met her once or twice. She's a great Welsh woman, very proud of her heritage, and I think she still lives in Cardiff.
Are you sure there's not a statue of
There
her?
must be
Maybe.
somewhere.
Well, maybe we
I'm
should
sure
go
our
check that.
viewers.
Well, let's
have another one.
Yes, exactly.
Let's have another one.
Exactly.
And make it pink,
Yeah,
so that it's nice and
what
female
do you do about
friendly.
this Welsh First Minister, Nigel? He's just embarrassing, isn't he? Mark Drakeford.
Well, I mean, I don't agree with this particular one, but I don't think on our previous story on the sex education, he's actually out of order at the moment.
Pass the blueberries, that's what I say.
Are you going to come back and see us next week, you two?
I thought I might do.
I think they might become our regular Monday sparring partners.
In your dreams, baby. In your dreams.
That would be very nice. So it's goodbye to Amanda, goodbye to Nigel.
No, it's see you again, Nigel, and goodbye to Amanda.
See you we're going to see them next week. We've come
Right,
to the end of
so
our show.
It has flown by. That's our Monday done and dusted. Tomorrow we're going to be joined by Sir Vince Cable and Angela Rippon. Coming up next is GB News Live with Mark Longhurst. This is The Point. With me, Bev, and Andrew, back tomorrow at 9:30.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. Some big variations across the country through the next few days. Wet and windy for England and Wales during today. Mild for most, but in the north it's going to turn colder as this area of low pressure moves away. That's bringing some wet weather to Scotland, Northern England, Northern Ireland at the moment. But as it clears, northerly winds return, turning the precipitation back to snow. In fact, we're already seeing some snowfall over the Highlands, and that will continue through the rest of the day. Otherwise, rain at lower levels for much of Scotland, showers into Northern Ireland, spells of wet weather for Northern England and much of Wales, and some heavy downpours for southern parts of England. Not a great deal of sunshine about, but there will be some brighter interludes for East Anglia, the East Midlands, and here temperatures could reach 12 to 15 Celsius. But colder air is on the way, coming down from the north, and that'll turn the rain to snow across parts of Scotland into Northern Ireland, Northern England. Mostly this will be settling over hills, but at lower levels, the risk of some icy patches as the showers drift south. And it's going to be a chillier night, with temperatures dipping below freezing across Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, but staying above freezing for southern parts of England and Wales. Showers moving through first thing across southern England, then brighter skies follow for much of the UK, but there'll be further showers for Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England and North Wales, and these showers will be falling as sleet and snow at lower levels, generally not accumulating at lower levels, but accumulating over the hills of North Wales, Northern England and Scotland through the day on Tuesday. And again, some icy patches expected to develop overnight and into the start of Wednesday. Showers then drifting south once again on Tuesday night, followed by clear skies and a cold night in some parts of northern Scotland, temperatures dipping into the minus double digits. But much milder air is on the way for Thursday and Friday, with some wet weather in the west.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
And YouView, channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.